I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You can go ahead and sit down. So as I was reflecting on this invocation, the first thought was we made it through a year without any council members breaking any bones, knock on wood, from slipping on the ice, which is something to be grateful for. And it's sort of in that spirit, and because this is our last meeting of the year, I thought it would be appropriate to use this invocation time to express gratitude toward the many people who come to work every day to make our city run. So this is an incomplete list of departments and people we work with every day, and many citizens in Billings don't know half of what their city does to make their neighborhoods safer and more prosperous. And so let's just take a moment to be grateful for our city clerks. So they come and stay very long hours and then write up minutes from very long meetings. We have excellent department directors that are here. We have a lot of them in the audience tonight. City administration. We have legal, prosecution, the municipal judge. We have a great team at the library. We have a robust Parks and Recreation department. The airport is a city airport, and it's doing really great and exciting things. We have police, fire, and first responders, garbage collection, snow removal, street repair. I mean, this list goes on and on. So this is not a complete list. But in the spirit of this season, I wanted to say thank you to all those listed and all others that have been left off this list, including my fellow council members. So it's been a real pleasure to serve with you this year, and I'm proud of the work that we've done on behalf of the city. So if we can give our staff a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that great list. Denise, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, Mayor. Councilmember Shaw.
Here.
Gulick.
Here.
Neese.
Here.
Owen.
Here.
Joy.
Present.
Chiriki.
I am here.
Tidswell.
Here.
Purinton.
Excused, but I think she was going to try to attend by online, and she is online.
Okay.
So present.
Boyette. Here. Repsis. Here. Mayor Cole.
Here. Thank you very much. Our first order of business are minutes, and we actually have both sets of minutes ready to go for approval or corrections. First up is November 28th. Do we have changes or a motion? Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I move we approve minutes November 28th, 2022.
Is there a second? Councilmember Ripsis? Any discussion? If not, in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. Second set of minutes are from December 12th, our last meeting. Is there, again, changes, discussion, or a motion? Councilmember Joy.
Thank you. I move we approve minutes December 12th, 2022.
Is there a second? Councilmember Boyette. Any discussion on the motion? Motion is for approval. Don't see any discussion. So if in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
If opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. We do have some courtesies tonight. We'll start off with Chief Rich St. John. Chief.
Mayor, Council, good evening. Officers Carney and Snyder, please report to the podium. It's on. Check, check.
You just have such a quiet voice, Chief.
I will project.
Okay.
Thank you. Mayor, Council, on June 30th of this year, Officers Carney and Snyder responded to a report of a suicidal subject. Additional information revealed that the 17-year-old female was planning to overdose on pills and hang herself in Sacagawea Park. Officers Carney and Snyder arrived shortly thereafter and located the victim approximately 15 to 20 feet up in a tree with a cloth belt wrapped around her neck. Both officers alternated talking to the victim, attempting to develop rapport. At the same time, they developed a contingency rescue plan should the victim jump. Despite the officer's best efforts, the victim stepped off the branch and began hanging herself. Immediately and without hesitation, Officer Snyder helped Officer Carney scale the tree, where he was able to pull the victim back onto the branch. Officer Carney then cut the belt from her neck, and both officers were able to pin and hold her to the branch until the fire department arrived with a ladder. It is obvious that the actions of these officers saved this young victim's life. Both officers demonstrated the spirit of leadership and a tenacious devotion to duty. Their actions reflect great credit upon themselves and the Billings Police Department, and for their actions, they are being awarded this department's life-saving award. Mayor, Officers Anthony Carney and Mark Snyder.
Gentlemen, if you would like, it's your night.
I'm okay.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Job well done. You have the appreciation of your community. Truly amazing.
Thank you, Mayor. I have another with your permission.
Please.
Unfortunately, it looks like our honoree didn't make it, but the entire supporting cast did, so I will move forward with this. I am honored to recognize in absentia Mr. Travis Salter for his heroic and selfless actions on October 3rd of this year. Mr. Iflin will get that. At approximately 6 p.m., officers were sent to the area of 21st West and Solomon Avenue for a report of an injury accident. While en route, the call was updated stating that the car was fully submerged in the ditch and that the occupants were still inside. Witnesses to the accident said they heard a loud noise and saw the vehicle hit the ditch bank, overturn, and roll into the water. The witness said he saw a man run to the ditch, jump in, and remove the occupants of the car. That man, Travis Salter, happened to be sitting in the athletic field bleachers at St. Francis Catholic School when he too heard a loud noise. When Travis looked, he saw the car go over the ditch bank and overturn. Travis ran across the field, jumped the fence, and ran to the ditch where he jumped into the water. Travis approached the car and saw that the occupants were trapped inside in chest-deep water. Travis punched the rear hatch window until it broke and pulled the occupants out. The occupants were uninjured, and Travis sustained abrasions and bruises to his hand. Because of his selfless actions and extraordinary bravery involving risk and injury to himself, I am honored to present this department's Community Hero and Life-Saving Award to Travis if he were here. His actions bring great credit to himself and speaks volumes for the quality of citizens in this city. Unbeknownst to me, the occupants of the car and family showed up, and they are in row number 3 over there. And also who I would introduce would be Mr. Terry Corey sitting back there. Terry was a mentor to me, got me into coaching 30-something years ago, and he was a mentor to Travis in his time at Rocky Mountain College. He wanted to be here to watch this. So with that, this award, we'll get it to Travis somehow. I hope he didn't slide into the ditch hurrying to get here. This life-saving award is presented to Travis in recognition for his courageous life-saving actions at the scene of a motor vehicle crash on October 3rd of 22. You put yourself in harm's way to save 3 lives with commendable courage. You are a hero, and that's from the Billings Police Department. So we will make sure that he gets that. Mayor, thank you for your indulgence.
Chief, I don't think we want to forget Mr. Salter, even if he's so humble they didn't want to come tonight. So maybe he'll see this. I just ask us to, again, give a standing round of applause for Mr. Salter.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Chief, and that's the kind of community we live in. Any other council courtesies this evening? Any other courtesies? Don't see any, so we'll move ahead to proclamations. We do have a proclamation tonight in recognition of Homeless Persons Memorial Day, and the proclamation reads as follows. Whereas December 21st, 2022 has been designated as Homeless Persons Memorial Day by the National Coalition for the Homeless and the National Healthcare for the Homeless Council. And whereas men, women, and children living without permanent housing in the city of Billings are in need of shelter, safety, nutrition, and health care. And whereas Health Care for the Homeless, a program of Riverstone Health, currently has 1,375 patients enrolled, and since January 1st, 2022, has provided 489 medical visits, 332 nurse visits, and 287 case manager visits at their clinics and at St. Vincent de Paul. And whereas the Billings community has a responsibility to address the factors that contribute to homelessness, including poverty, lack of affordable housing, lack of access to mental health care, and lack of access to addiction treatment. And whereas the Billings City Council, in partnership with the Continuum of Care, United Way of Yellowstone County, Community Crisis Center, and Billings First Church, is working to provide low-barrier shelters to the people who might otherwise be sleeping outdoors this winter. And whereas the annual Homeless Persons Candlelight Vigil, organized by Health Care for the Homeless, will honor the memory of the 17 people known to have died unhoused in Billings in 2022. The citizens of Billings are invited and encouraged to participate in the vigil at 12:15 p.m. on December 21st, that'd be Wednesday, on the lawn of the Yellowstone County Courthouse. Now, therefore, I, William Cole, Mayor of the City of Billings, do hereby proclaim December 21 as Homeless Persons Memorial Day in Billings and encourage us all to recognize it on this very cold week. That's the end of our proclamations. Council reports. Any reports from organizations? Councilmember Rupsis.
Thank you, Mayor. I have actually two reports. The first is I wanted to provide a little report from the Downtown Billings Partnership. I serve on as the council's representative on that board as an ex officio role. The DBP, the Downtown Billings Association, and the Downtown BID had a joint board meeting this past week. And Katie Easton presented an overview of the great work those groups have done over the last 6 months, provided a couple of their handouts to you there. But just to kind of recap some of the great things, Officer Nick Fonte has been hired as the third downtown police officer. They've done 20 CEPTED evaluations. 23 people have started the MAP program. And of those 23, 21 are actually in treatment or in sober living right now. So that's great success rate. The homeless outreach team has worked with 123 individuals over the last 6 months. In terms of housing, we all know this, but 102 new residential units have been approved, projects that will bring those new housing units to downtown. The public bathroom is sitting here in Billings. It's just waiting to be hooked up. They finally have a contractor that they think is engaged to do that, but it'll probably be the spring before that can actually get hooked up. And they had a record-setting event season this year, 28 event days and 41 downtown promotion days. So just wanted to recognize Katie and her entire team there at the DBA, DVP, and BID groups and the great work that they're doing to help improve our downtown. The second update I just wanted to give real quick, you all received an email this afternoon from Carrie Boyder at the Continuum of Care. The low barrier shelter finally got its final approvals. Thank you to city staff, the fire department, fire marshal for getting all that through. They had their annual meeting, the Continuum of Care had their annual meeting last week. They elected a new board, and their new board will elect officers in January. Low barrier shelter, as I mentioned, is now set up. I was actually over there this afternoon with a group of high school kids clearing out that space and getting that ready. So they're going to start opening and housing people hopefully this week in the next couple days. So as soon as they can get their staff in line. And there are a whole list of supplies that would be needed. If you know anybody that needs those things, they were in Carrie's email. Everything from large tote bins and smaller containers, Ziploc baggies, toilet paper, hand sanitizer, face masks, duct tape, Ziploc baggies, all that kind of stuff. So anything that you can do, they can bring them to Billings First Congregational Church between 9 and 4 every day. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Other council reports, Councilmember Joy and Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Council Subcommittee on Local Affairs, my cohort being Councilmember Tidwell. We met today and have established our rules, and I was elected the presiding officer for our committee. We have had some discussion about the jail, and we will continue that discussion. Our next meeting, we're really kind of looking into identifying some of the issues that we need to prioritize to see where we can best spend our time and where we can achieve outcomes and recommendations that the council is interested in. So please do write emails to either one of us and identify some priorities that you think that we should work on. And we will, in our next meeting, we will look through those and try to come up with some strategies to achieve those. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you. The Legislative Committee met last week, and the update to pay attention to is there will be a resolution for council's approval on the just January 9th agenda for City Council, where we're recommending, we express approval unanimously. Our committee is recommending we express approval for several bills and some tenants from the Montana League of Cities and Towns. So you'll see that soon.
Thank you very much. Any other council reports? Don't see any. Then we'll ask our city administrator, Chris Kukulski, if he has anything for us this evening.
So first up, just trying to go back to some data from the police department on warrants. So this is the week of December 7th through the 14th. And they are now bracketed into a handful of buckets that I think are continue to kind of refine things. So 225 interactions with individuals with warrants from the police department. 39 of those felonies, 99 misdemeanors, 3 missing persons, 4 protection orders, 3 runaways, 1 summons, and 76 in the traffic category. So 1,779 year to date. So again, very general, but just a reminder of kind of what our officers are doing out on the street and some of the challenges that they're facing. Great news. Thanks. Some folks here in the room and several community volunteers helped. We were about 2.5 days last week interviewing finalists for aviation transit director. We do have a selection that individual has accepted, and I do expect that press release to be ready in the morning. The recruiting firm will have it for us. So be on the lookout for your inbox there, and we're excited to bring him into the organization. Rocky Vista, the president there, called and asked they would like to schedule a tour for all of you and staff in February. My suggestion was probably later in the afternoon, 3:30 or 4 with schedules. And my assumption is a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. I don't know if there's any hard preference between those dates and times. Please let me know. I'm going to give David a few. He asked me to present him with a few dates and times that we thought would work. So if you can let me know if I'm off there, the assumption late in the afternoon, and a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. Reminder, this is, as the mayor said, our last meeting of the year, so Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and no ex parte communication, Mayor. That's all that I have for you this evening.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. We'll move on then to our public comment on non-public hearing items, which tonight is everything on our agenda, because there won't be an opportunity for public comment later, except for on non-agenda items at the very end of the meeting. So if you are here to comment on anything under item 1, the consent agenda, or item number 2, the capital improvement plan, or number 3, new city hall funding options, now's your opportunity to do that. Just ask that you come to the podium and keep your comments to 3 minutes. Tell us your name and address.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Randy Hafer, 702 North 23rd Street. And I would just like to speak for a minute to your first item on the agenda, the CIP. And that is because on the CIP, which you're hopefully approving tonight, there is the 25th Street Bike Pedestrian Bridge. For those of you that aren't older than time, just to remind you, this says 2001, And this one says 2009. Anyway, this has been around a really long time. The Minnesota Avenue neighbors came together starting in 2001, created a master plan for the neighborhood. It included things like creating a historic district, which we've done, creating the quiet zone. That took 8 years. We're also diagonal parking and street trees, some other things like that. But the bridge was one of the key elements of that plan. At the time, we were all pretty convinced that the west side of 27th Street would be all done before the east side. Well, we're not all done yet, period. But the east side is what there is pretty done and really ready for this bridge. So very excited to see this. Just hope that you all can support that and move it forward, because there is funding now. The bridge is still available and we're ready to rock and roll. And it's super exciting. So I just wanted to let you know that some of us have never forgotten. And we're very excited to see this thing go forward. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Any other public comments on any of the items on our agenda tonight? Any public comment? Anything online? Nobody is online. So we will close the public comment period and proceed to item number 1, our consent agenda. Are there questions are there any separations? Councilmember Triki.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I would like to separate item 1N as in Nancy, the resolution adopting the rules governing the remote participation of board, committee, and commission members.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other separations? If not, is there a motion for the non-separated items? Councilmember Boyette has the motion. Councilmember Tidswell, the second. Questions, discussion on the motion? Any discussion on the motion?
Excuse me, point of order, Mayor. The motion has to actually be stated by the council member.
I appreciate that. Sure, absolutely. Councilmember Boyette, I'm reading your mind.
I thought it was a little fast, but I know Christmas is coming, Mayor.
You were trying to move ahead here. Go ahead.
I move to approve the consent agenda except for item 1N as stated.
Yeah. Okay, the motion is made, stated, and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? This is for approval of the non-separated items. Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number, the buses, heavy-duty electric buses. I had a good conversation, email with Rusty, and I understand that we're moving forward with this, but I would like to see the city look at not just electric as an alternative source, but things like propane and stuff like that. I know sometimes the rebates are not there for the propane, but reach out to the propane industry and maybe they can do something about that as well. I think there's options there that we may want to look at as far as it may even be cleaner than what we talk about some of the electric, because as I've been finding out, sometimes the production of electric is not as clean as maybe some of the other alternatives out there. So just would like the city to make sure they're aware of that and look forward to maybe seeing some other things besides just electric. Thank you.
Thank you. Hydrogen, for example, is also an option. I had a conversation with somebody about hydrogen just the other day. Okay, any other discussion on the motion? If not, if all in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Brings us to item 1N, resolution adopting rules governing remote participation. I know that we have one minor technical change on the resolution itself too, but before we get to that, Councilmember Triki, this was your separation. Would you like to start us?
Is the change on paragraph 2?
I don't think so.
Because what I wanted to do was to just bring to council's attention paragraph number 2, and I'll read it out loud. The bureaucrat in me is just mildly worried, so I'll read it out loud. Remote participation by a council member may be available only upon the determination by the city administrator that the city has the technological and administrative capacity to support remote participation, and remote participation is beneficial and convenient for the administration of city business in the discretion of the city administrator. I understand the point and the reason for doing this in here. The language of it just makes me a little bit worried that some city administrator may just say, hey, no, I want you guys to always show up and just, make it. I mean, there's no criteria in there whatsoever about what those terms mean. It's all very vague. So I just wanted everyone to be aware of that before we voted on it.
Thank you. Why don't I comment, and then I'll turn over to the other members of the Council Operations Committee to give their explanation of that. The concern was that there might be requests for remote participation by boards and commissions that meet in various places that don't have all of the capability. It wasn't really aimed at the city council, which we assume that we can control the city administrator if there were a problem in that way. But the particular concern were boards and commission. I think Chris had a concern that there might be situations where it was just going to be very, very difficult with that many groups. Before we turn it to Chris to air his concern about that, Councilmember Boyette, Councilmember Denise, you're part of that committee. Did you want to comment further on that issue?
No, Mayor, I think you put it well. I believe the idea was we didn't want, people saying, hey, we have to have a connection when there really would cost a lot of expense to the city to do that. And like you say, yeah, we can tell, as a council, tell Chris, do that, or not do that, depending on what we do. So we want to make sure this is in his hands because he's going to really be kind of helping with those committees.
Councilmember Boyette or Chris, did you want to comment? Okay, so Chris, did you want to comment further?
I don't have anything to add.
Okay, so do with that what you want, but that was some of the thinking behind it. All right, there was a technical change. Councilmember Denise, can I turn it to you to address paragraph 8?
Yes, so paragraph 8, when we drafted this, it looks like we used in line number 3 towards the end, you'll see if any time the member does not have an audio/video connection, there really is no interpretation of what that slash means. And so rather than trying to make that at the time interpreted, we decided, I think it'd be best if we were to change that audio/video to just required connection. It does talk earlier on what the connection requirement is. And so this would just reference the requirement of the connection.
Okay, thank you. So in other words, the two words "and" audio/video would be replaced with "the required." So it would read, does not have the required connection.
Correct.
Okay, Councilman, and so if anybody makes a motion to adopt this, we'll need to have that included in the motion. Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor. I can't recall, but you're looking at it, so maybe you can. Does it require the required connection include video?
It does.
Thank you.
Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I move we approve resolution adopting the rules governing the remote participation of all City Council, Board, Committee, or Commission members with an edit to paragraph number 8, crossing out audio/video and replacing it with required connection.
Okay, just, and I think the "and" goes away also, and in its place goes "the." So say would not have the required connection.
And strike the words "and the."
Yep, thank you. And second by Councilmember Shaw. Discussion. If not, we'll proceed to a vote. No discussion? Don't see any hands. Motion is for approval with that change to paragraph 8. If in favor of the motion for approval, please say aye.
Aye.
If opposed, say nay. Motion passes. Councilmember Purington voted with everybody else. That concludes that item number 1 and brings us to item number 2 of our regular agenda. Denise, would you read item number 2?
Resolution approving the FY 2024, FY 2028 Capital Improvement Plan, CIP. Staff recommends approval.
I'm gonna make some changes while you fix it. I can't believe you did it. Try that.
And then, Mayor,
Councilmember Boyette?
while we're waiting for technical support here, our it's scheduled for Monday the 2nd. Are we changing that to the 3rd? I just want to make sure everybody here is aware.
Yes, it is. The first meeting in January is, the holiday is observed on Monday, so the council meeting is on Tuesday, the 3rd.
Very good. Appreciate your pointing that out. Tuesday, the 3rd will be the first meeting, and I will be out of town. So if you got any complaints about that, talk to Councilmember Boyette. I've asked him to,
Deputy Mayor.
yes, Deputy Mayor Boyette, he gets the gavel.
You're not taking me with you.
Andy, our Finance Director, Andy Zeller, it's all yours.
Good evening. All right, I got a Christmas present for you. It's the CIP. We're wrapped up and ready to go, so we'll get through it quickly. What you have before you is the proposed CIP that was presented on November 7th. There have been no changes. There have been quite a few emails. We're going to try to address most of those topics here. And then I have a couple of items I'd like to see, or I'd like you guys to consider amending the CIP, mostly just cleanup, but we'll go through those. So how we got here, up there, we started October 26th, making this available, presented to you guys over a series of work sessions, did one task force meeting, and then here tonight for adoption. And as I stated, there were quite a few emails with a variety of topics, potential amendments. So I've tried to address them at a very high level here. There's staff to talk about them in great detail if you guys want to discuss them further. One of the first ones was the Parks CIP. There was a comment about what was in the CIP and then what was presented as a Parks funding plan a week or two after we presented the CIP, and some inconsistencies there. And so I worked with Mike to kind of mesh that together, and we agree there should be consistency there. So the next slide will show you some of that. And then we're also requesting that the Pioneer Park tennis courts, which are in the CIP at FY25, included as part of the GO bond, be moved to FY24, and the identified funding source be PD1. There's been some identified issues, more emergent need for repair there, and that's the reason for that request. And they can talk more about that. Why PD1 on that? Through analysis, looking for funds for Stillwater, it appears there's about I'll say $1.3 to $1.5 million in PD1, assuming bids come in as we hope they will, that could be used to move this project up. So there is funding capacity there, assuming the budget and actuals come in pretty close to what we anticipate. So when looking at the Parks funding plan, it really looked out further than the 5 years that's in the CIP, and it's a combination. We were recommending adding some of those projects into the 5 years that's in the CIP, but these are large projects that'll take a long time to complete, and so some of them would be pushed out past the FY28 year, which is the last year of the CIP. So what we have here is just a rough kind of calendaring of what we'd like to see. Those first 5 years there in green, or maybe a light shade of green, are what we would recommend amending the CIP to include. These would be the bonded projects for the CIP. The only thing I'll note here, well, not the only thing, one of the things I'll note here, the rec center amount, is it not going forward? It is going forward. Oh, all right, she's just, okay, all right. Yep, that'll work. I don't think I got much on that side. So the rec center is on there at 68 million, about 30 additional coming from the South TIF. That was based on the amounts that were presented, assuming one sheet of ice. I believe it's the executive committee is recommending 2 sheets of ice. That'll be coming forward to you in January. I think that's about another $16 to $18 million on top of that. So I've asterisked that one because I think that amount, it's going to be before you with a higher amount, and that would change if you guys approve that. So what we would recommend adding to the FY24 to 28 CIP is highlighted in bold on the left. So the Centennial Park, Stagecoach Trail, and the indoor tennis and pickleball courts. The other projects, Castle Rock, Poly Vista, Colson, and Cottonwood, would be 29 and beyond, so not in the CIP. This would add 13.8 million to the CIP, but it's a total additional projects of 83.7 million. There's a correction for a funding source, the two-way street, this is one of the things I'd ask you guys to consider amending the CIP to correct the funding source for the two-way street conversion, as well as a portion of the 25th Street Bridge. Presently, those are in there as funded with downtown TIF cash or tax revenue, and we don't have the cash flow to fund those projects. They would require a TIF bond. That's consistent with what we had presented all along verbally and discussed, but it's not what's in the CIP. So I'd ask that you recommend or make that funding change. And then again, move the Pioneer tennis courts from 25 to 24 and then fund with PD1. And then amend the parks projects to be funded with GO debt consistent with that previous slide. Some of the this is where we'll go through kind of the topics that were in the email. I believe I captured them all. I may have missed a few, but again, we're prepared to discuss them as you guys like. There was a consideration to delay all of the improvements to the arterial street projects, which are in FY25 and beyond. They're not FY24 projects. And then take that funding and increase maintenance and operation for existing programs. And we certainly support that, inclination to increase the funding for those because we've been saying that for a while. We need to get funding up for those, but don't think it's wise just to cut all the arterial in order to do so because there's a need there as well. So that's the comment there. The BOC facility wash bay project. Currently, we're using wash bays as indoor storage. For example, a fire truck, I believe it was there today or over the weekend, it can't sit outside, it's got water in it. So we have to stick it somewhere that's climate controlled. And so we're using the wash bay for that. We're using facilities to store and maintain vehicles when it's really cold because we can't do it outside. So we are kind of running into some limitations for space. There's also some limitations with our ability to service CNG solid waste trucks because they require some very specific air control and heating elements due to the natural gas that is inside of them. There was a discussion to strike all planning documents from the CIP. And my only comment there, staff is not opposed to the recommendation, but planning documents that lead to capital projects, they are capital, but they don't necessarily fit the definition or criteria of our CIP. However, we do like having them in here as it does clearly identify a funding source and really, because of the 5-year look, it kind of identifies, hey, we're doing a plan in 3 years, 4 years, which is, I think, a little bit better than the budget because it's more forward-looking, where the budget's just on an annual basis. Certainly, you could take the approach to move them to the budget if you desire. Evaluating break rooms, storage facilities, and reporting them during the budget. What I interpreted from the email was that this wouldn't necessarily be an amendment to the CIP, but would really, what council's desire our Councilmember Owen's desire was that there be further analysis when the FY24 budget is brought forward with these projects in there to be more comprehensive and examine opportunities that exist for, I'll say, multiple departments at one location. And then there was a comment about delaying the 25th Street Bridge. Generally, staff doesn't support this recommendation just due to the fact that there's some funding available. If we do bond for the two-way street conversion, it would be advantageous at that time to size it up. I believe it's $250,000 to $500,000 for the additional funding needed for the 25th Street Bridge, rather than coming back later and doing an additional bond for that small amount. It would just, there'd be some economies of scale in borrowing there at that time. And then having it current would also allow us to pursue some grant funding and donations in a more immediate basis. So that's all I have for a presentation. We have all the slides from previous CIP presentations if we need to go through and you want to look at specific outlay of projects and timelines. But really, I want to turn it over to you, Mayor, and Council to kind of talk about any recommendations you'd like to see for modifications.
Okay, Council, the question will be, how do you want to eat this elephant? There's a lot, it's a big one with lots of little parts. So I assume we'll want to jump into individual parts. But before we do that, just a couple, one caution, which is if you're referring to a part of the CIP and it's not just immediately obvious from the presentation or and it would be helpful for people to refer to the details. Tell us what page you're referring to, because there's 160 some pages or whatever it is, right? Some of them may be just obvious, and there's a great summary, you know, at the very beginning that you may also be able to refer us to if you think it's necessary. Just keep that in mind. And then how do you suggest we jump into this? We can go kind of department by department. I'd say maybe we could start with parks and then go to public works or something like that. But before we get into those, are there any overall questions or comments? Let's start with questions, and then we can kind of jump into statements of opinion and conclusions. Councilmember Owen and Councilmember Tricky.
I do have a question, Mayor, and then I would, when we get to it, just like to make a comment and a thanks about the Budget Committee's consideration of the CIP.
Great.
So I have a question for Parks about the Pioneer Park tennis courts, which I had sort of mentioned in my email. Given the sort of what we've heard here and the conversation, the consideration, there are two, as I understand it, tennis courts at Pioneer Park, if I remember correctly. Is there a possibility to enclose or partially enclose one of them? I mean, can we kill two birds with one stone here? Is that even technically possible with the amount of land that's available?
Councilmember Owens, just to give an overview of the tennis courts at Pioneer Park. We have a total of 9 courts there. 3 were recently constructed around 6 or 7 years ago. Then we have another group of courts, 6 courts. 2 we had to take out of play due to safety issues. It would be challenging to only put 1 court under a bubble. If you're going to do a bubble, you probably want to do it over all 6 courts. But that's something we could look into when we look at replacing the courts and look at it as possible additive alternate.
That would be my thinking, is could that pot of 6 go under a bubble? And I guess what I didn't understand is there even enough land around that you could have space for spectators? Could you physically put a bubble there?
Councilmember Owens, I don't know at this point. I think that's something we could look at when we look at doing the design.
Based on having spent a lot of time in the bubble at MSUB, no. You know, you can have a few often on the edges and stuff, but there would be a cost to that. Councilmember, had I recognized somebody else? Councilmember Tricky, I'm sorry. Councilmember Tricky and Councilmember Joy.
I was going to make a procedural comment, so I'll hold.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This question is for the Director of Parks. Is enclosing the tennis courts at Pioneer Park part of a master plan?
Councilmember Joy, no, it's not part of the master plan.
Thank you.
Okay, other Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you. Also a Parks question, Director Whitaker. Andy. No, I actually want who you're whispering to, yeah. You stay sitting, yes. So I'm still really struggling to understand this $5 million that's in the budget for an indoor tennis and pickleball court and why that is not just part of the rec center conversation. Why is this a whole separate project? Why are we not just putting that $5 million into the rec center and adding more courts there? It feels to me like we're spreading out, we're dividing off groups in a way, and in my mind, it makes more sense to keep everyone centrally focused on this one big project. So can you help me understand what the thinking is there? I mean, is this going to go in a dramatically different area of town? The need is there, no question, but I don't understand.
Well, Councilmember Shaw, when the rec plan, or when the rec center project was looked at, and we've done 2 planning studies, the indoor tennis facility was not even on the horizon. The Elk Tennis Center was functioning really good. So tennis was not even part of the discussion. It did not come into the discussion until the master plan had been completed for the rec center. And at this point, I don't know if there's enough property on the site to accommodate an indoor facility. But on the 21st, Dusty from A&E will be presenting a recommended update to the rec center. That would be a good time to have that discussion.
Okay, thank you. I think to council, I would like to have that discussion and consider amending the rec center plan versus having $5 million for an additional structure if there's land available. So I won't make an amendment or anything to remove it because I know it's, FY25, but this is a concern for me.
Okay, Mike, just to clarify your comments, so indoor or use of the courts facility in the rec center, or the courts could be used for pickleball. They could be striped, and that was part of the plan as well, right, for the rec center? Striping those for
Mayor
pickleball?
Cole, yes, the 8 courts will be also striped for pickleball too. So they will be used during pickleball during the day.
Okay, not tennis, but pickleball. Thank you, Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Director Whitaker, could you, if there's communication with Mr. Eaton about the rec center, could you also include some information about cost recovery in regards to tennis, indoor tennis? That a lot of what we know about the planning and development and construction and programming for the rec center is really built around our study on cost recovery. So if we are going to go to another sport and another thing, and I would like also that cost recovery be a part of how we think about adding something to that study. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. I think there's been some good things brought up about this, the tennis and the indoor and looking at Pioneer Park and spending money there. Now we're going to a tennis and pickleball center. It seems to me like maybe the plans need to change. And here we have some planning documents, and I'd like to see some of that combined if possible. But it's kind of tough to approve a plan when we're not even sure that maybe Pioneer Park isn't the way to go right now. Maybe there's other things that we want to do. And so I hesitate even approving the Parks Department right now until we can really determine, what's going on. But I do have a question, and sorry, that's my comment about this discussion regarding the tennis courts. But I do have a discussion, maybe this is to you, Chris, because I'm not sure, again, this is a planning document, and what was brought up was there's lots of need for city public, whether it's public works or parks or other departments that need a city facility outside of the core, and they need it up in the Heights, or they need it in the West End, or they're going to need it up in the new Heights, that it's going to come there when the inner belt loop is in. And so I think what, as being a planning document, what was mentioned by Andy is, well, maybe we won't change anything in this planning document to have the different needs for break rooms and maybe minor repair facilities and things like that, or storage facilities. But I think, is this a planning document? We need to make that change. We need to get all the departments who have been talking about, what they need outside the core and say, well, you need to put that in a separate facility, and we're going to call this city facilities Heights or city facilities West End or something like that. And you need to bring to us what needs to be there. And so the planning document needs to show that, so that Parks is going to have a portion of the City Heights and Public Works will have this portion of the City Heights. And that's where the funding is coming from, the different things, so that we can plan for those things. So I think it is important this document be changed that way to include these, as we are growing and getting bigger, that we actually have these type of facilities for our city employees to be able to do that. Again, usually cost reduction and just to be able to make sure we serve the citizens well.
Okay, just a comment, I assume, or did you want anybody to respond to?
I guess let's have can you respond to how can that be put, can you change the CIP to show what these needs are going to be? Because if we're planning out 5 years, I'm assuming they wanted to build these in the next few years. We really need to have that planned in the CIP in 5 years. We're going to build a city facility in the Heights in the next 3 years, and the West End we're going to do on, over here, and then plan for, some years when the inner belt could. So is that something that can be done within this document before we approve it?
So Councilmember Neese, really goes to Councilmember Owen's question, comment as well. Full agreement of the administration and directors relative to, as I hear you, if there's a west facility, if there's an east facility, and there's needs in multiple departments, we want to maximize resources by sharing facilities. And if we're not, we need to define for you and the public why it didn't make sense to put, as an example, some storage of, materials or something on that site. So we're in agreement that makes sense, and we're in favor of that. I don't think, have to be reminded what was in the 2024 year. As we look at the budget, absolutely, we would anticipate. For years, there's been talk of a parks facility in the Heights. Some of what's being talked here, Public Works, is on that side of town, where they can and should collaborate. Hear you loud and clear and agree. They should be sharing resources to maximize resources in that capacity. Same on the West End. And so any amendments you want to make to the plan tonight that guide that, we certainly support. I'd like to give a little bit of feedback relative to, I'm concerned about managing expectations relative to indoor tennis. Because and I was not involved at the beginning, 100,000 foot level. I think I got here as the tail end of the overall multi-generational rec center. Was extremely involved in what we've done this past year or so. I can't describe why tennis is not a part any more than I could say why lacrosse is not a part, or indoor soccer fields. I'm presuming all the community efforts, tennis wasn't a part of that dialogue. As Director Whitaker mentioned, wasn't seen as a need for indoor tennis facilities. I just want to manage the expectation that the contract with the architect to do this work, if we want them to go and do a bunch of analysis on tennis, he's not going to be able to come here in January and give that to you. And I don't think that's a reasonable expectation any more or less than I would find some other sports and say, why aren't they there? Other than to ask the core committee, how did the work narrow down to predominantly hard surface courts, water and ice, and a few other ancillary things. So just want to be sensitive to what the expectations are and it's never too late to do the right thing if tennis should be a part of it. But I just want to manage how we as a community would answer that question while getting this plan reviewed and adopted.
Pam's got her hand up.
Yes, thank you. Councilmember Purington, your hand is up.
Yes, it is. Thank you for noticing that. So a couple of questions that I had regarding the parks funding, and with Andy's news graph that he had, I'm not sure how these are addressed, but one of the first questions is, why is the Hawthorne and Terry Parks under Parks Department while Rose and Pioneer are under Recreation? I can see where Rose would be because they actually, contribute some money to the recreational needs. So that's one question. My second question has to do with these wading pool replacement and the splash parks or splash pools. I'm not sure the correct terminology. But each of those are coming out, there's what, 3 of them? They're coming out, no, there's 3, at $1.8 million. And I think one of the points that's been made is, just generally speaking, Castle Rock had their splash pool, or like I said, I don't know what the correct terminology is for it, but theirs came in between $150,000 to $200,000. And so each of these are looking at closer, basically say $2 million. So Pam Ellis had sent some good information. And I think either Councilmember Owen or Neese could speak to Castle Rock as well as Mike. But I'm just wondering, why are we going through wading pools? Why we don't use the type of build out that they did in Castle Rock and use that water to water those parks rather than having recirculating equipment, because it seems to me like, there's more mechanical stuff, more stuff's going to break down. Thank you.
Thank you. Andy, Councilmember, or Director Whitaker was headed toward the podium as well, so however you guys want to handle that.
I'll answer the first one because it's simple, and Mike, he'll take the harder one. So the reason Pioneer is under rec is nothing more than it was a classification that we had it marked as a rec project when we put it all together. It could just as easily be a parks project. No real reason other than we had it marked as rec, and so when we compiled it all together, I've left it there. But if that was a desire of council to move it, we could do that.
Okay, Mike Whitaker, Parks Director.
Good evening, Mayor and Council again. Just a little history of the spray ground at Castle Rock Park. It was completed around 18 years ago. So escalation has definitely had an impact on spray grounds. And as I've stated before, there are 2 types of spray grounds. One is recirculating. That's basically, it's almost like a pool. You're constantly recirculating the water. You're filtering it. You're sanitizing it. And you're not wasting water, but it's not going to the drain. The spray ground at Castle Rock Park, along with other playground or spray grounds, they are what's called spray to drain, that the water goes directly into the sewer system. At the time of South Park, when it was constructed, the direction on or consensus on council was that we need to look at conserving water, and a way of doing that was doing a recirculating system. So there are 2 types of systems out there that we can build, and to me, it's more of a policy decision from council if you want to do a recirculating system or flow through or spray to drain. Whenever possible, we do reuse the water. Castle Rock Park was a good example of reusing the water. But other parks like Terry Park, which is on city water, it would be impossible to reuse the water.
So follow up, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mike. So with regard to South Park, it's my understanding that they have a hard time keeping that functioning. Is that correct? And is it due to the recirculating mechanism that's going on there? Because you're only using it 2 months out of the year. That just seems like a lot of money for 2 months out of the year.
Councilmember Puritan, it's like a pool that has to be monitored on a daily basis. And We have to monitor the pH and the chlorine levels of the system. So it does take staff time, but we're able to combine, utilize the staff from South Pool to monitor the spray ground.
Just one more follow-up, Mr. Mayor, if I can.
Go ahead.
I know that there was some mention in going to Missoula to visit my grandson there. There's one park that we do go to, and they have one of those spray grounds. And it doesn't come on until you step on it, and which is surprising, but it's pretty cool because of, to me, the conservation of water in that type of a system as well. Do you have any comments regarding which of these you think are the most economical but yet user-friendly type of systems?
Councilmember Puritan, the system you're describing, all of our systems have activators on it that they have to be activated before the water will start spraying. So that conserves the water. It's not spraying 24/7. It's only when kids are out there, they can activate and turn the system on.
Thank you.
Mike, just to follow up with that, I think we're all kind of interested in this and also a little confused about what the right course is. We're not going to resolve that tonight in the CIP process, but will there be some sort of, assuming the rest of the council agrees, that it'd be good to have a little bit more analysis that we could participate in and see, you said yourself, it's a policy issue, the spray to drain versus recycling. What are the costs? Could we go into that in more depth at some point in the near future?
Mayor, I think once you get in the design phase, you can look at what it would cost to do a recirculating system versus a flow-through system. And Chris just brought up a good point. The discussion that the spray ground's only open 2.5 months out of the year, that is not correct. It's open roughly around 4 months out of the year. They open early towards around the middle of May, and they close around the middle of September. So they're usually operating 3.5 to 4 months.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Dees?
Thank you, Mayor. Just to follow up on what you said regarding when you were talking about the spray park, I think in Terry Park, you said it would be impossible. Impossible is a pretty big word. So I'd like to know, I mean, it may be not feasible, but can you explain why it's impossible in Terry Park?
Oh, it's not impossible. The irrigation system at Castle Rock is, we irrigate out the ditch. It's using ditch water. And we currently irrigate Terry Park out of city water. We would have to convert over to put in a pump station and put in a holding pond to be able to use that water. And at the same time, there would not be enough water to irrigate. We would have to have another water source. It would be challenging. I take that back, not impossible. It might not be economical, but it could be done.
Okay, so if it was drained into a holding tank, then you would pump out of the holding tank to do the water, but if there's not enough water, of course, then the city water would have to fill that tank in order to give enough water to be used. So it is possible, just the cost of maybe building a holding tank to hold that maybe not be feasible enough as opposed to just running the spray park for 4 months and doing the cost of that, having to filter versus just watering. Okay. Yeah, again, I'm interested in hearing those cost options there as well to see that maybe it actually would be better to do something like that versus having these filtering systems that, that's a lot more breakdown and cost that way that we're actually adding to the process long-term versus just a simple pump system.
Okay, thank you. We're not going to solve that problem, I don't think, tonight. Councilmember Ripsis, and if you don't go to Public Works and your email, I will pretty soon. So go ahead.
Actually, I wanted to stick with parks.
Okay.
Just a second. I just wanted to remind council that the original estimate for the South Park spray ground, that council had given the direction to go to a recirculating feature, came in at about $300,000. And it was later bid out at $1.3 million. And Mike, if you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the deal was there was only one provider that would actually install that system. here in Billings. Well, they were a national provider, but there was only one bid and only one person out there that would actually install the system. So it came in at $1.3 million, and there was obviously a scramble of, are we going to do that or not? And so the decision was made to actually do it.
Councilmember Rupes, if I can update it. The original budget was $500,000. We did bid the project. We had two bidders in, and one was rejected, and the second one was also rejected because they couldn't get a bid bond. So we also we rebid the project. When we rebid the project, we only had one bidder, and it was decided at that time to go ahead and move forward.
All right, thank you. Andy, could you put up the updated plan? This is the first, yeah, please. This is the first we've seen of it, so it's kind of, it would have been good at least to see this before tonight. So is this replacing everything that was in the plan before, or is this supplementing what was in the plan?
So,
And can you help us understand what the changes are?
yeah, so to answer your first question, the only thing so I'll start with, these are only the bonded parks projects. These are not all parks projects. Okay, so these, before, the ones that are not bolded there on the left, those were in there originally. There was in there the Pioneer Park tennis courts. That has been removed because we're recommending funding that with PD1. And we've added in the bolded projects, which were the additional projects that were not were not on the CIP, but were part of the parks funding projects that were presented, I believe, the week after the CIP.
So now we're up to $178 million in bonds. This is everything that we would anticipate bonding for.
Correct.
And so the presentation that we had was a little less than that, but it didn't have things like the South Park pool in it, Pioneer Park wading pool. Those weren't being bonded in that presentation.
Correct. The presentation that was provided by the Parks Department on November 14th, 21st, yeah, did not include the Terry Park Spray Ground, the South Park pool, or Pioneer wading pool replacement. The other items were in there. The rec center, West End Water Reservoir, although that may have been at $6 million, but it's, yeah, it was in there.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else on parks? Let's shift to Public Works. We can go back to parks. I just wanted to address Councilmember Rips's email that we got Friday morning, in which he calls for these a proposal that would delay these 4 different projects, counting Rimrock as being one of them, with the idea of then putting those dollars into or expanding the paver program, implementing safe throughout the streets recommendations, traffic calming, and right-of-way entry maintenance, landscaping, weed control, street sweeping, et cetera. The staff recommendation was, they didn't like that, but it was sort of clever language that says that, I forget exactly what it was, but it was basically we would not support delaying all of these, which does sort of beg the question about some sort of partial delay. Some of these aren't just issues of delay, but would require new funding, which could mean cancellation of some of these projects. The projects added up to about $23 million in total. So just want to wade into this and get staff's recommendation, i.e. Debbie, or at least comments on which of these 4 or 5 projects are really critical. Can you put them on the spectrum for us, or are they all equally critical? We understand you're not opposing more funding, but you are not looking for finding the new funding by eliminating some of these other projects. So Debbie, do you want to just jump into this $23 million gorilla?
Sure. not sure where to start, but we'll start here. So FY '24 is obviously the one that we are always the most concerned about when we do the CIPs. We look the 5 years, but there's a lot that changes in 5 years, so that FY '24 is really important. Those are the FY '24 projects, and you can see there's not a lot there. Well, none of them are included in the Councilmember Reps' email. So just want to point out that FY '24 isn't really, there hasn't been a lot of comments about that. On the next.
And just to clarify, though, isn't the Broadwater project, it starts in '24, fiscal year '24, the Broadwater project is my understanding, but that was the only one.
The design might have, the construction's '25, so I'll look at that. I didn't see it, but, so there were projects that we put in there, and I showed you guys what our criteria was for selecting that. We went through a long process to try to assign need, to assign factors to everyone to say, we think this is important for this reason or this reason. We went through that, and what came out of that was the projects we have on that list. This list is projects that we also think are important, didn't rise to the same number as the rest of those. So if it's project specific that you don't want to look at, I think that we should have a conversation about more of these and maybe our criteria. I think completely shifting those funds is not, in my opinion, a good way to go about how we build and maintain our city. Things like Rimrock Road, like Broadwater, like 54th, those streets have never been built to a city standard. They have no subgrade. They're not going to last forever. They're not built for the traffic they're seeing. They don't have multimodal. They don't have crossings. They don't have anything that creates a city street that is safe. In my opinion, my professional opinion, it is not what we're building in the city of Billings. We're not at capacity on any of those, and I know that's been a concern. That being said, to your comment, I think we can shift. I think we can balance better. Like I said in my conversation when I was here last time, a lot of those didn't rise. We think we need to adjust our factors a little bit. We added some in. So I think that we can, this is a long way of saying, yes, I think we can talk about adjusting some of these. I think saying that all of these projects should come out of that is not the way that I would build the West End. And I think most of those were West End projects. Scott Aspenlander spoke to that when he was here last time. It is the very first thing that comes up at every meeting we have about annexation, about subdivisions, about zoning, is what's a traffic. And on a lot of those, we have to say, yeah, it can't. It's not a good idea to continue developing on some of those locations. So you asked a lot of questions.
I did.
So I'm not sure if I hit all those, but if we want to discuss projects and which ones belong, I just would not wholesale change all those out. I do have one more slide because someone asked about safe routes to school and what kind of numbers we're looking at. We tried to assign some numbers. Now, there's a lot of projects in there and a lot of estimates that we had to just, put some rules of thumb toward. But these are the types of numbers you're looking at for safe routes to school. So when you're talking about moving $20-some million out and you look at the total cost of safe routes, I'm not sure we have to go that far. Obviously, paver's a big number. But you can see here, even to hit those green ones, we're looking at $1.2 million basically on non-sidewalk and then $4 million on missing sidewalk. A lot of that is assessed. Corner lots, that kind of thing are not assessed. So usually that comes out to about 45%. So just put those numbers together so you had some kind of idea of what we're talking about for safe routes. So keep in mind, this is a 1 week estimate of 100 and some projects, so.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Ripsis, you want to follow up there?
Debbie, don't go away. So let's split the difference. If you had to do 2 out of those 4 projects in the next 5 years, and we could take the remaining funds and do safe routes to school, close the paver gap, that kind of stuff, which 2 would you pick?
So you had Rimrock, 54th, Broadwater, and what was the other one?
36th.
36th. Oh, well, we wouldn't have them on here if we didn't think they were important. You're putting me on this spot here. Broadwater, because it will not develop anymore, there is not going to be any additional traffic in that location. We've lived with that a long time. That being said, that road is falling apart. So in that case, you're not talking about delaying development. You're not talking about some of those issues. So that probably would not rate as high if we looked at it. 36th is due to the neighborhood's concern about kids leaving the school. They keep going down those local streets to get to 35th. So providing 36 gives people a way to not go through those neighborhoods. But doesn't exist now, so in my mind, that's probably less important if I had to pick two. But I want them all, for the record. No, I'm just kidding you. What I'm saying, we put a lot of numbers on these, and they came out high. So.
Hey, Debbie, while we've got you, if the Rimrock were delayed, what impact would that have or not have on the 63rd Street roundabout, which is MDOT project, right? How important is that those be coordinated and happen at the same time?
They are, so the way that we are working with MDT on 62nd is to build it with the idea that it'll be built in one phase, and we're going to build 62nd to 54th in a second phase. So being right on top of each other is not, it doesn't have to be built in the exact same year, so.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Owen?
Let me just approach this question in a different way. These 4 projects are important. Investing in the arterials is important. But so is the maintenance. The paver, I think Councilmember Neese and I both talked to you about a project in the Heights where the neighbors are very concerned about the cost of trying to fix some of these projects. Safe routes to schools. The maintenance side of this is critical too, and we know it exists in transportation and in stormwater. So where are we in planning for different strategies? What are the discussions on how we overcome these hurdles? What proposals, what can council do to support that kind of planning or thinking? How do we solve this differently? Because what we're doing isn't working either.
Thank you for pointing that out. I agree. So we have tried very hard to balance basically what we're given with the funds that we have with increases that keep up with basically cost of living. Certainly not inflation this year, certainly not, materials cost. But we've tried very hard to balance that because that has been basically the mindset. I know there's a better word for that, but that's kind of been the mindset of here's where we are. Let's balance what we can. Let's not lose any one part. Let's just keep it all kind of moving. Chris has been very clear that he doesn't want us to continue that without at least showing you what that would cost to do it right. So we're doing that. So our stormwater, for instance, you brought that up. We have a committee that's working on, Councilmember Gulick's on that, and he knows the numbers. I'm not saying them tonight, but stormwater, we're looking at, okay, here's do nothing different. Here's if we want to be a bronze level city, silver, gold. So we're going to bring you those numbers and say, this is what it costs. And Chris has asked us to do the same thing with our street maintenance and basically our maintenance overall.
But what about the strategies on funding those? Are we being innovative and creative and looking at new ways to consider that as well? How much of that rests on the cost of service study, those sorts of things? I get the numbers are going to be big.
Right.
But we have to talk about the options to solve them. Yep. Otherwise, it really is hard to keep building new if we're not maintaining what we have.
Right. So when it comes to stormwater, we are looking at alternate funding like system development fees. We don't have system development fees on our stormwater, and we should have. Transportation, we don't have impact fees. Certainly something can be discussed. When we look at development and we look at how that's driven a lot of those roads that I put up here, Rimrock Road is purely development driven. If it wasn't for all those developments out there, we wouldn't be having this discussion. So we need to do a better job capturing some of those funding sources up front. And that hasn't been something the city's done in the past. We're going to propose those and see where they go.
Okay, Councilmember Gulick, and then Councilmember Purington. Councilmember Gulick, though?
Great, thank you. Yeah, thank you for your response to my comments back in late November. And I recognize fully that removing projects is a big deal. And what I'm going to say, sort of again, I guess, is not. It is recognizing that, but it's. I'm glad that last week Scott Esben-Leiter let us know that developers are paying attention to what we do in the CIP and what we're prioritizing. I think we just can't continue a business as usual approach regardless of how we fund, because we're not being able to keep up with maintenance. And so I don't think it's in the interest of Billings citizens for us to be perpetuating this sort of development cycle that we've been on in terms of our land use patterns and our infrastructure. And I think we really, we've been doing this for a really long time, and it's, the low density vehicular centric development, even if you have bike paths and other things, it stretches out our public works, it stretches out our public safety services. our cost of services grows faster than our tax base grows. So then we have to go back to taxpayers for more levies. So I think we need to be thinking, it's not even just more holistically or just like multimodal. I think we really need to be sending the signals out to the developers too, that we're going to have to change the way we're doing things. And so, you know, while our development agreements require that the cost of street for and water and sewer for the local streets and a portion of the arterial is covered by them, you know, 20 years down the road, we're going to have to repave those streets. We have to, and all along the way, we're sweeping those streets. The developer's not paying for any of those costs. So, it's not a very good return on investment for our dollars, I feel like. And meanwhile, we have the Eber district where all the infrastructure is there, but none of the developers are getting the price signals to go after that property. And I think it's in part because they're getting a really good deal doing greenfield development right now. It's because we're kind of partially subsidizing that. They're not paying the full life cycle cost, basically. So again, I think for Billings citizens, this development strategy is still, it's not a good return on investment. So I put my comments out there not knowing exactly what the best way was to make the change. I'm looking for staff assistance in getting there, but I think we really do need to make some of those changes. And one of those things I think in terms of what is a really good return on investment is something like the Fifth Avenue corridor, where I think it really does have the opportunity to, we've got a lot of multifamily development, housing can go along there, and it doesn't put a big load on a burden on our transportation system. It doesn't cost a lot to do that. I think we should be leveraging some of our transportation dollars with the TIF dollars to make that happen. And so we have, you know, some money in there for engineering, but I think putting both design and construction in there would be really good. I think that's a really good return on investment project. So anyhow, I like us to think through ways that we can make that happen, and yeah, maybe put a little bit of we need to send some signals to the development community that we're looking to change the way we've been doing things. So sorry to monopolize so long, but yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Purington and Councilmember Joy, and I see that we're evolving from questions into positions. So, but Councilmember Purington?
Yeah, and part of, you know, I can appreciate, Ed, what you're saying. However, I will say, I think a lot of that also adds or is part of the philosophical differences in possibly what some of the developers want to do. And so, Debbie, I guess I want to go back to the balance. I don't even know if balance is a good word, but just the strategy of moving forward. How do we move forward with these changes in how we move traffic more efficiently, safely through the arterial corridors versus some of these other less costly, if you will, traffic calming measures that we use through neighborhoods. I think what Scott said last week really just rang true to me, and just because of how I drive through the city. And I tend to go more towards the traffic lights at this point because sometimes it's hard to get around stop signs. So how do you make those strategies happen whenever you are trying to prioritize whether we put our money towards like the paver program versus arterial improvements? I'm really concerned about Rimrock Road, Grand Avenue, Central, and how we move through those with the county assistance. Are we working with the city county planning? So I know there's a lot packed into that, but I guess I'm just trying to see how all of this can happen? I know it's a lot on your plate to take care of these individual programs, but if you could just address those a little bit to help clarify.
Sure. So I think what I've heard very clearly from some of you this year is that we want to put more money on some of these other programs that we haven't funded as heavily in the past few years. We've had, I'm not sure if balance is a word, but that's the word I'm using. We've balanced like getting ahead of some of these locations that really need some work. We've balanced that with paver and sidewalk program, that kind of thing. There are some things like construction season, it's short, we don't have enough contractors. There's some things that really truly from a constructability standpoint have to happen the way they are. But what I've heard is we want to put more money here and less money here from some of you. I haven't heard that, that's up to you guys to decide if that's all of you or not. But if that's where we want to go, then when we put these together, we just need to factor that in. If we have the same pot of money, it means you're taking away from one to give to the other. If we want to increase that pot of money, then that's what Chris has asked us to present is what does that look like? And that's what we will be presenting when we can get that figured out, including impact fees for roads, including system development fees for stormwater, and then just including what those rates would be to truly be able to keep up on everything.
So just slight follow-up, Mr. Mayor. So how does your planning, how much is it affected by what the developers want or what they're asking for? Ed's saying, no, we need to tell the developers what we're going to do. And they're saying, well, this is what we need to do in order to proceed. And so to me, the market kind of drives some of these things. West End versus downtown, well, it's a completely different type of development, but yet we keep hearing we need to develop because that just adds to our economy. So how do you structure that? How does that play into your thought process?
So as of now, I would say the city has been reactive. I mean, there isn't a road in town that we got ahead of development on that it just hasn't happened. So I would say we're relatively reactive right now. In the tool that we used this year, there was a line item that said supported the growth of our city, given our current need for housing and that kind of thing. We did factor that in. I can't tell you exactly how much that weighed in, but again, I think we're reactive. So we don't get ahead of a road, for instance, for a development coming in. That hasn't been the way we've done it in the past.
Thank you.
Okay, I forget, Councilmember Joy and then Councilmember Shaw. And just a reminder, we're going to need to draw some sort of conclusions, in particular on the park amendments and this issue we're talking about now with Public Works. Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is for Director Melling, and I think if she's disliked the other questions, this one you're really going to hate. Just teasing, just teasing. When you're talking about the tool that you're using to score and sort of rank the projects that you're doing, and you talked about maybe changing weights using that tool in order to rank your projects. Based on some comments from council, and as you say, it's not clear exactly how much support there is on council. Can you think of ways, or is it possible for us to look at, or for you to look at your tools, your tool that you're using and the way it's weighted to help to balance out, say, redevelopment or infill? Do you think, is that something that your tool can do based on the kinds of broader policy type considerations? Thank you.
Councilmember Joy, yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, that is one of the criteria we have is does it support infill? The other thing it says is does it support the goals of the city council? So we do look at what the goals are. Are we trying to be developer friendly? Are we trying to be, conservative on things. You know, what are we trying to do? And we try to factor those goals in as well to see how well the projects meet those goals.
Thank you.
Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you. I'd like to go ahead and make a motion. I move to approve a resolution approving the FY 2024 to FY 2028 capital improvement plan as recommended by staff.
Motion made by Councilmember Shaw, seconded by Councilmember Neese. And for adoption of CIP consistent with staff recommendation. And just to clarify then, that staff recommendation would include the chart of additional parks projects that Andy presented.
Yes, this is just to start the conversation, so exactly what staff presented. And now amendments can be made.
And I believe then that would be the only change to the printed version that was in our packet. Is that correct? I'm kind of looking at staff to just clarify that that is the staff recommendation, the packet plus Andy's chart with the green shading.
I guess for clarification, my anticipation was you would make amendments to the proposed CIP. If you wanted to amend with the ones I've recommended, you certainly may, but that's up to you guys. I wouldn't consider those as part of the staff recommendation at this point, since I brought them forward tonight.
Which I think helps the public, right? So everybody's got the clean version that's been out there in the packet. So in addition to that would be, if you're inclined, amendments to include the things that Andy added tonight, as well as amendments to make the changes that you've been discussing in emails and other things.
Okay, Councilor Shaw, just to clarify then, whether it's a little bit ambiguous, whether that's a council recommendation, or I'm sorry, staff recommendation, but was your intent to include the chart that Andy presented with the green shading?
It was, but I understand why it maybe makes sense to not do it in the original motion. So I'll just leave it as what was in the packet that was recommended by staff, and we can add these things in if council so desires.
Okay, so that's the motion. Councilmember Neese nodded his head that he's in agreement with that. So that's the motion before us. Councilmember Owen, Councilmember Rupsis.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to speak very briefly before we get into amendments on our budget committee process on this. Really appreciate Chris and Andy and everybody kind of adapting as council gets its committees up and going and working us into this process. And we're having this conversation about how we schedule the budget review and all those things. And I'm grateful for the staff work here. We debated the CIP and discussed it at length. It had already been presented to council, and because it had been presented to council, the committee ultimately did not recommend any changes as committee recommendations, but instead suggested that individual council members, myself, Councilmember Boyette, and Councilmember Gillett could bring their own amendments if they so choose. And so some of these things that I'll talk about tonight were discussed in the committee, but are not committee recommendations. But I know that everybody has fielded a tremendous amount of questions from us on the committee as well as the full council, and I'm grateful that we're able to have this discussion and debate tonight. I do have a couple amendments that I will offer when we're ready to do that, but I just did want to offer a word of appreciation for all the hard work and responsiveness that has gone into this. Even today, Wyatt spent about 45 minutes on the phone with me trying to talk me down from my terrible amendments. So I'm grateful for the ongoing engagement of the staff because we've done a lot of work, I think, on this CIP. So just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. And as long as we're saying thank you, Councilmember Owen, for your useful emails setting out various issues. Very helpful. It creates good dialogue. Okay, we have a motion before us. Councilor Rupsis, I'd recognize you.
Thank you. I'd like to echo those thoughts. It's a tremendous amount of work putting the CIP together from all the different departments, and so thank you to everybody that laid into that and with addressing our concerns because there are many of them. I did want to offer an amendment to start us off. And I would like to move that we separate the Parks Department CIP project and reconsider that next month when we have a chance to digest what the new proposals are. But instead of trying to figure that out tonight, let's put that off and address that next month.
Second.
Okay. Second by Councilmember Neese. Further discussion. We did something similar last year. Councilor Rupsis, you want to discuss that?
I would just offer a comment on that. Again, I'm not sure that we should be putting the spray grounds in at $1.8 million before we do the aquatic study. I think that's premature. I don't think we should even be setting the expectation that we find a $1.8 million spray grounds reasonable or feasible. I don't see that coming before council and getting approved. So I'd like to see a different approach there when it comes back. So maybe put some thought into that and how we might want to adjust that. And then really, and just in terms of the prioritization of the projects, what I'd encourage council is just think of, is there any way we can come to a decision over the next month of which projects should be prioritized? It's nice to see them laid out over 10 years because we're not going to do them all over 5. But if we had to pick some to start with, what are the ones we'd really want to start with? I'm not sure that we've had that discussion as a group. So I'd like to have at least some insight onto that, or be able to give staff some guidance on what our priorities would be over the next 5 years before we approve the CIP. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Troy. Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I think I will support the motion because there are maybe some additional questions that need to be answered before the council feels comfortable with moving forward with the projects as they're being identified. But I would just say, like always, the CIP is planning. It is an allocation of funds. So the most important, there's two pieces in my way of thinking about the CIP, there's two portions of this. There are identified capital projects, but the second part of that that's way more important is the funding source. So I could think of a lot of things that might be in West Billings or Heights Billings or whatever location that we might identify, but I have to identify the funding source. If I don't have a funding source, it's a wish list. And so what the CIP does is marry that idea of what capital projects are identified, but it isn't a wish list. Why? Because you have to find the funding sources for it. So it's a planning document. So I will support, I guess I will support the motion to delay that, but it's really, really important to, like Director Zeller has said, every time he walks up there, what's the funding source? If you haven't got a funding source, it's a wish list. And it's not Christmas year-round in the city of Billings. So you have to have the funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. Tom, I'll support this as a second, but again, one of the things that kind of surprised me is suddenly there's $1.2 million of PD1 money. This happened not too long ago where there was another $1.2 million that went into Poly Vista Park, which was a great park, and I support that. And now we have another $1.2 million out of PD1 of funds that somehow just didn't get used. These are the type of things I think that the Parks Department has done over and over again and not really put good forward planning of what projects could be done as far as what's spent. So I think that money should be discussed. And is Pioneer Park the place to put it in? I don't know. Maybe there's some other things in Castle Rock Park that needs to be done, or Centennial Park or something like that wasn't finished off. That really, that's what PD1 funds are really been designed for, to do some of that capital improvements before the PD1 expires. So thank you for bringing that up.
Councilmember Owen, Councilmember Rupsis.
I just have two questions, Mayor. One is for the sponsor. I don't recall if you and I had this conversation, if Councilmember Neese and I had this conversation, but is this an effort to create a sort of a permanently separate CIP plan for the parks? Are we headed in that direction?
No, not at all.
Okay,
No.
okay. And then my other question is for Andy. Are we going to hear more about the Parks Department reserves in the context of the Stillwater conversation?
Yeah, I do have that.
Yeah, then we don't need it. I don't need you to talk about that now, but I'm hoping to hear about those reserves in that context as well. Okay, thank you.
Stay tuned. Item number 3. Councilmember Trachey.
Yeah, I have a.
I'm sorry. I had.
Thank you. I just wanted to offer a quick clarification there to Councilmember Neese's comment, and really in fairness to staff, Andy and Michael, related to the PD1 reserves. I think when we went through and did that analysis a couple years ago, Andy was very careful to say this is what we conservatively estimate as unallocated reserves at this point. And at that time, PD1 hadn't been sunset. So, having that idea of these projects will continue, you approach that a little differently than if you have a sunset and you might see that, now we know exactly what will be coming in, what's planned to go out. I completely understand where that might have come from. So just a little context in where those reserves might have materialized.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Tricky.
I'm just curious if the sponsor in the second had in mind any specific changes for the 2024 portion of it, or if most of the questions were actually in the programming of 25 and out.
I think is the only real change was Pioneer Park. My only question about 24 is how that affects the rest of the rest of the years following that. But it is a 5-year plan. So yes, the first year is obviously the most important, but we're making plans and preparations based on the entirety of it and not just that 1 year. So I think it's worth just a month to kind of make sure we understand this before we vote on it.
Thank you very much. Further discussion. Again, the motion is for, well, actually, it's a proposed amendment just to remove the park section. Further discussion on the proposed amendment. Is there any further discussion? Okay, we'll proceed to a vote. Is the motion clear? If the motion is clear, all in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Councilmember Joy votes in opposition. All other members voted in favor, so the motion passes. And brings us back now to the amended motion, which is adoption of the printed portion of the CIP. We've kind of dealt with the parks element there, at least temporarily. Discussion on the now amended motion. Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. I've been thinking about this, since I got elected. I see this as Councilman Joy said, this is kind of like 12 kids in a sandbox saying, what do I want for toys to play with in the future? And they give us their best shot and say, this is what we want. My problem is voting for a package where, let's say I don't like 4 things. How do I hold myself true and say, I don't like these 4 things, but I have to vote for the entire package? That's a real problem of mine. So, I'm going to have to say I don't want to vote for the whole package if I can, because what everyone else thinks is a good package, I may not. And I'll just bring up one item is the transportation of $7 million to make 2-way streets. No one has told me yet that any of the people downtown have come to us and said, we have to have 2-way streets in order to stay in business. We haven't heard that relationship. But I'm just saying, years ago we had 2-way streets, then we went to 1-way to move. Now we want to go back again. So my thought is concerning is how do I vote for a package when there's items I don't like that I know can't be changed? That's just I just wanted to express my concern.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Purrington has her hand up. Councilmember Purrington.
Thank you. Gosh, Mike, I'm glad that there's someone else on my side of the fence on those 2-way conversions. But I agree, and that was actually one of my questions to Chris was, there are things that I would like to see changed in the transportation documents, but, to sit and pick and choose those, I think Debbie's maybe looking at some of these a little bit differently, I'm not sure. And she did say, I think at the beginning, that this is a plan, but they change from year to year, especially moving beyond 2024. I think there's better use of the dollars, and I think part of it was gas taxes for the 2-way conversion to be used in the downtown area. But I just, so I'm on the same page as you are, Mike. I have, there's bits and pieces of the CIP that I don't agree with. So staying true to myself, I feel like I can't vote in favor of the whole package, but yet it doesn't mean that there aren't things within the CIP that I agree, that I would definitely support. So I don't know if just picking and choosing certain things that I don't want to support, I don't think that's fair either to the rest of the council members because it just delays the process. But there are certain things that I don't agree with in that plan. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. And just a reminder, you're always welcome to make amendments or propose amendments. Further discussion on the motion. Councilmember Ripsis.
All right, thank you. This is going to sound weird and horrible. But I'd like to make a motion to separate out the transportation projects for consideration next month. And if there's a second, then I'll explain that reasoning a bit more.
Second.
All right, thank you.
And Councilmember Ripsis, can you clarify what you mean by transportation projects?
Just
'Cause
the
definitions-
transportation projects as listed on page 11 of my document, from under the blue heading of transportation projects from 21st Street underpass down to Wicks Lane.
So these are all of the projects totaling over the 5 years, 99,830,000.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
My reasoning for this is, we heard Debbie say that there were two projects that she would potentially, if forced to, deprioritize out of the four, the Broadwater and 36th Street. And to me, it's interesting that the Broadwater actually ranked higher, I guess, in the tool than Rimrock, but she chose to deprioritize that. Also understanding that there are multiple different funding sources under a lot of these projects, and not knowing what can be used for, say, increasing the paver allocation or increasing, safe routes to schools support, anything like that. I don't know that we're prepared to make those recommendations tonight on specific things. What I'd like to see is for Debbie's staff to come back and say, this is how we would maybe rebalance some of these priorities so that we can make some progress on closing the gap on paver, so that we can prioritize some of these safe routes to schools and traffic calming over the next 4 years. Make some progress on that. I'm just not sure how that would play out, what it would look like over the 5 years. And since one of the recommended projects from Debbie actually does have an FY24 impact with the engineering starting this coming year, I'd like to see that recommendation for staff before we just approve these set of projects. Thank you.
Okay, and that was the motion. And did I hear a second?
Purington.
Councilmember Purington.
Mayor. Yes.
Okay, very good. Then we do have a proposed amendment. Discussion on the proposed amendment. Councilmember Keeler, Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you, Mayor. That seems like a good idea. I support the motion because anything that I come up with is going to be pretty ham-handed, and on the fly. If there's changes I would like to see, and I'm obviously not alone, but I want to do it in working with staff because there are a variety of different funding sources. Not everything applies different places. And then really quick on the subject of two-way conversions, I thought we made it very clear that downtown, most of that's repaving costs. Only about $1 million is for the two-way piece. And I might add that there's ample evidence that this is a really good return on investment. If we're going to be entrepreneurial as a city, that this is one of the best places we can put money. Just had to get that in. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Shaw and Councilmember Owen.
Thank you. I'm not going to support the amendment because my perspective is I don't have a lot of concerns with FY24. I don't disagree with a lot of the comments that have been made. And so I think for Director Melling, I would support going in this direction and getting more information. To me, asking Public Works to come back in a month with essentially a whole new plan for us or a whole lot of sources seems like a lot of work for a budget cycle that we don't actually have to address immediately because the FY24 projects are not in general of concern. So that would be my reason for opposing it. And I would encourage us to approve this, but send the message to Public Works that we would like to have a further conversation about this, especially as we ramp up to the FY24 budget cycle, and really give them the time to come back to us with suggestions and tools in that capacity versus trying to kind of tweak and ramrod that through here in the CIP level. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for bringing up the question of timing. Councilmember Ripsis, can I just ask you to clarify your motion? Was it just to remove this from the CIP, or was it to remove this section from the CIP and require alternatives to come back within a certain time frame? And if it was the latter, did you want to clarify that?
I intended to do the same thing that we're doing with the Parks Department. Just come back in a month, make the tweaks or other suggestions, and we'll approve it at that time.
Okay, so it does have the time element sometime in January?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, all right, thank you. Councilmember Owen and then Councilmember Neese?
I have just a question for the sponsor, Mayor. I'm sympathetic to the concern. I am not optimistic that we would get much difference in a month. So I'm wondering if maybe we could work, even during the break, which we're coming up here shortly on, to craft some language directing the staff to do some things in the budget cycle so that there are things in FY24 that need to be addressed. Maybe we can give some direction as to what we expect to see before or during the budget cycle that more comprehensively addresses this, because we're not allocating funding tonight. Can we come to an agreement on some sort of language that makes clear what we expect to see when they do come in 24, that it's not just take what's in the CIP, stick it in the budget and we're all happy, because council's not happy. But can we give them some direction on what we expect to see when funding really does get allocated? Would that solve your concerns?
So, Councilmember Ripsis, you can respond, and I guess my interpretation would be it would remove the January time frame and just put it before the end of June.
No.
In the budget process.
Approve the CIP tonight, but get the issue resolved in the budget cycle.
Okay, so do not remove the transportation pieces from the CIP tonight. Okay, Councilmember Ripsis?
And again, my concern is because one of the projects that Debbie mentioned that she would choose to delay if forced to, actually does have FY24 impact. And so I'm hesitant to pass a CIP that includes an item that will then go directly into the budget, but then tell staff to say, but don't really put that in the budget yet, or make some changes or something. So I'm worried about providing the right direction to staff by passing the CIP that with that kind of footnote to it.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Neese. Councilmember Tricky?
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, I had a question for the movement also, but I think you answered it, is you are concerned about FY24. Okay, thank you. I do have a question, Mayor, for Debbie. Thank you, Debbie. And as we all know, we got announced, there was an announcement school districts is doing redistricting, and so there may be changes. And so I did email Chris and Debbie on this, and I also emailed Superintendent Upton as well. And so I know you may not have all the information yet, but how do you think that may impact the CIP if they're changing the districts and we have to change some of our safe route to schools, and I may identify more areas that are unsafe that we have to address right away? Do you think that'll change your goal here?
So initial conversations, I think, indicate that it won't make a big change, but I think Wyeth has had more conversations than I have.
We've reached out.
Okay, sorry, I'm not.
Thank you.
Councilmember Neese and Mayor and Council, and I didn't know that you had copied Superintendent Upham, so maybe there'll be a response there. We reached out to this school administration with your question just a couple days ago, and we're just waiting to follow up with them to clarify whether, what their take is on that. We're assuming, and it looks, we're assuming that there's going to still be a lot of what's already in the plan and what's recommended that it'll stay the same, but we have asked them to help fill that in and respond. So we'll have information back to you as soon as we get that from them.
Okay, and do you happen to know when they may be done, when their plan's going to be finalized?
My understanding was they're in comment, I think we're talking several months still, but we'd have to clarify that because they're in a public comment period right now.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn to Councilmember Tricky, but while we've got Debbie right here on this timing issue before we get it, Debbie, could you just clarify if this is put off, what that does to your planning schedule? Is it a problem? How much time do we have to adopt the CIP? My understanding we're not looking at a big deadline, but I want to know if that's your perception. But also, if you were to come back in January, would that be sufficient time in your view to think about and make some alternate proposals?
So to Councilmember Owen's point, this doesn't assign any dollars at all. So if the CIP is approved, but there is a general consensus on how we should develop our budget, we start budget in February. February? Was I supposed to start already? We started earlier. We're starting right now or right after the holidays, basically with our budget. So we would be doing the CIP and the budget basically to give you the same thing about that time. January is a little tight to really be able to look at all these and the factors that go into each project. So I guess I would say January's fast to come back with something else. February, we're going to be bringing it to you soon after that for budget anyway. So we would have it at that time. Very close. And Jen, yep, she's.
And if you needed more time, I guess this is a question for Councilmember Ripsis. If we got some sort of a status report, but a request for more time, would you blow your top? Not a bit. You would not a bit. Okay, good. All right. Councilmember Tricky?
I very reluctantly supported the Parks one. I don't think it's responsible for the council to continue to punt this stuff off for additional times. We just heard about the time crunch of what's going on. The next major step is the budget, and it's going to take time into there. If there are specific things that people feel like need to be addressed in this year's plan, then bring that specific up for an amendment. If you're worried about things that are going to be happening in 2 or more years, then let's just bring up a motion on there in order to make a recommendation to staff that they deal with those differently. I mean, we don't have to punt this stuff. We can get a lot of this work done tonight. And there's going to be a lot of other stuff that we're going to have to deal with in January too, So punting these things down the road sounds nice because we can not make a decision tonight based on all the full information that we would love to have in order to make these decisions. But frankly, we're never going to have all of the information that we want in order to be fully informed on which one of these things we should be doing. So I really cannot support this amendment.
Thank you. Further discussion. Councilmember Neese?
Thank you. Tom, I want to support this, and so let me ask you this. Is it just the Broadwater item that you, in fiscal year 2024, that you're concerned about at this time for fiscal year 24?
Well, that's certainly what's driving the near-term budget impact, right?
Okay. So if we could make a change to your motion to approve the transportation products except for Broadwater and fiscal year 25 on, would that be acceptable? That way, at least the staff can get moving on the rest of the items, and then we can address in a month the Broadwater and then future years. Would that be acceptable?
I think if they're going to take this and go into their budget cycle, and they remove the Broadwater project, that should open up funds for safe routes to school and paver and those types of things, right? So those should all be inputs into the budget process, which is why I think it's important to at least have that kind of discussion on, if we're going to change some of these priorities over this 5-year period, there's immediate impact to this budget cycle that we're starting. So I think it's worth taking a little time and letting them come back with a proposal of, okay, we've heard council's concern that maybe we're, a little off balance and focusing on these other projects and not enough on the paver and the safe routes to school and the traffic calming, those types of things. And we would like to put that in place. This is how we suggest how we do it. As Councilmember Gulick said, if we tried to figure that out tonight, it would just be all wrong, and we don't know all the funding resources and what can be
Yeah,
used for what.
I don't think it's a good idea to try and figure out all that night, but I think if we can just remove the one item from fiscal year '24 and also bring that item back along with others, then we would just make an adjustment to the CIP for fiscal year '24 if we reallocate some of those. But at least the staff could have a good idea of what they need to budget for fiscal year '24, except for the amounts that on Broadwater. If that's the only one that you want concerned, I would like to see us at least move something forward for the staff now, and then come back. We can always amend the amounts for their budget later on. It's a lot easier change, I think, for them.
Councilmember Supes, if you want to comment, and then I'm going to comment on the merits. Okay.
I just want to make it really clear that we do not give specific directions to staff about how we want to see this change tonight. We're not going to see any changes in January. So, getting into the details tonight, one way or another, is going to happen.
Thank you. I'm very nervous about not giving staff a chance to look at this in a calm and calm way. To put Debbie on the spot, say, well, give us two. I certainly understand the desire to try to get some specificity, but I'd hate to hold her to let's get rid of Broadwater with that degree of analysis. So I support delaying these and giving it back to staff, asking them to come back. But I agree with Councilmember Trickey, they need as much direction as possible. So from my perspective, and council should feel free to disagree with this, but you're picking up on what I think is the majority view on a policy decision that we would like to see more go into these maintenance projects. My pet peeve is, why can't we put $100,000 towards spraying weeds on major arterials leading into our streets or into our city? Shiloh, 27th Street, Main Street, a few things like that. But those are not transformative major dollar projects. So my suggestion would be staff keep it pretty doggone modest for the first year. We're kind of moving in this direction, and we're not talking certainly $23 million. We're not talking even half of that. I would say a couple $1 million, and that's it. That's my perspective. Fairly modest adjustment. Other council members may disagree, may want something much more aggressive, or some may not want that at all. But I would say keep it modest so as to have time in January to make these relatively modest adjustments. That would be my attempt to give some direction to staff while still allowing them the chance to look at it more holistically. But further discussion, again, the motion before us is to remove this whole section and ask staff to come back in January with their proposal. Correct, Councilmember Ripsis?
January or as soon as possible thereafter.
Or as soon as, but at least a staff, I think a status report would be helpful. So, okay. And Councilmember Purington had the second on that. Further discussion, though, on that motion. Is there any further discussion before we vote? And council, that we'll try to wrap up soon after that because we're break time. Okay, if the motion is clear, if in favor of the motion to remove this section, come back in January or soon thereafter as possible, please say aye. Voting aye. If opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Let's get a show of hands. If in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Voting in favor, council members Gulick, Neese, Cole, Boyette, Rupsis, and Councilmember Purington. And Purington. Yes. If voting in opposition, council members Shaw, Owen, Joy, Chiriki, and Tidswell. So the motion passes narrowly, 6-5. That's the amendment. It brings us then back to the underlying motion for approval of the CIP with that those two changes. Councilmember Owen.
Thank you, Mayor. So I had indicated in an email to council that I have 3 amendments that I wanted to offer tonight. I'm not going to offer the amendment on the 25th Street Bridge, for the proponents, why it was very persuasive, and helped me really believe that there is more planning going on here than I think maybe the CIP would allow, the CIP would allow us to believe. My concern here, and what you'll hear in my other two amendments is, and what we will discuss robustly after the break, is we have a very large City Hall planning project with a $13 million budget overage going on right now. So I think our discussion tonight on the CIP and the upcoming discussion on the budget really needs to be considered in the context of that significant overage. And so when we have a $4 million facility here and a pedestrian bridge there and a storage facility there, it starts to look like maybe there's a little more helter-skelter project development and not comprehensive planning. So the 25th Street Bridge project and the 21st Street project, and now what MDT is talking on in the railroad, that is a whole neighborhood that deserves an intentional plan. That it is an opportunity for us to take a very exciting area and make it great. And so I was worried, and I still am a little nervous, that we don't have a fully comprehensive plan. But I've had conversations now with multiple people who have indicated that there is one, that these are projects that are designed to drive some private sector investment. I think we constantly, when we're talking about transportation, are challenged with how we work with MDT. And so I am hopeful that we can continue to talk about strengthening that relationship so that we understand what they're doing on 27th and how it plays into the investments we're making. But my overarching concern in all aspects of this capital improvement plan is that we are showing the voters of this community impact, that we are showing them value for the investments that are being made. I think the 25th Street Bridge project, in the context of some of the underlying development work, I'm hopeful that it is as robust as I've been led to believe. And if not, we'll talk about it in the budget, because I've asked for some additional documents, and I appreciate that. I do, however, want to turn to this issue of break rooms and storage facilities and maintenance facilities throughout the CIP. There are two of them planned for FY24, close to $1 million worth of remote facilities. These are not unnecessary facilities. I'm not doubting the underlying rationale for this or for what we know to be the park's desire for remote facilities. I just don't necessarily believe that we have done enough work to say, can we combine facilities? Can departments work together? Can we use existing facilities? How can we be as efficient as possible? Again, in light of a very large City Hall project, we need to really show bang for the buck. It's my understanding, as Chris represented, this does not concern them to undertake an analysis here and see what we can do a little bit better. So instead of having one remote storage facility here and one break room there, can we bring these together? We don't have to discuss that tonight, but I would like to offer an amendment that we direct staff to do that evaluation and come back to us during the budget discussions so that we know in 24 that we are maximizing our efficiency and potential. So I'm going to move that we direct staff to evaluate the break room, storage facilities, and maintenance facilities throughout the CIP and report back to council during the FY24 budget discussions on a strategy to use existing spaces, jointly build facilities, or plan across departments.
Second.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second. It's technically not changing the CIP, but it's part of implementation of the CIP.
I think it's important that we discuss it here, yes.
Sure. Councilmember Joy.
Thank you. I would ask a procedural question. We have a motion on the table. This is a direction to staff. That is not.
Yeah, I apologize. I think
do that.
Councilmember Owen, unless we, well, I guess one way we could look at this would be an amendment to the CIP. So I guess that's how it would be my interpretation. This is.
That would be my expectation.
A footnote, an
That this would
asterisk.
appear as language in the CIP. Yes,
Okay.
Mayor, that's correct.
It's an asterisk to the CIP. So let's interpret it in that way. There was a motion and second discussion on that proposed amendment to the CIP, adding this footnote. Is there any discussion? If not, we'll proceed to a vote on the proposed amendment. Okay, if in favor of that proposed amendment, say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Motion passed. Council members Joy and Tricky voting in opposition. All of the council members voting in favor. Then back to now to, again, the underlying motion for approval of CIP with those three amendments.
Call the question.
Motions, or the question is called, so now we need to vote on whether to vote. And I think we need to get 3/4, so it'll be 9. If in favor of.
Point of order.
Councilmember Neese.
I don't think this is, the question of this CIP has had full discussion, and so to call the question prior to all council members have an opportunity to make motions is out of order.
Order is the question?
Yeah, it's not debatable, but what I can do is I can ask who would like to make further comment. That's not debate. So if the motion fails, who intends to make additional comment? If so, just raise your hand. Councilmember Owen. Okay. So now we have to
Mayor,
proceed to.
It requires, that's me, right here.
Gina, would you comment?
It requires 2/3, not 3/4.
Okay, thank you. 2/3, so it'll be 8. Okay, anything else, Gina, on the procedure before we proceed? Okay, so this is just a vote on whether to vote. If in favor of proceeding to a vote, raise your hand. Voting in favor, council members Shaw, Joy, Chiriki, and Boyette. Voting in opposition, council members Gulick, Neese, Owen, Cole, Tidswell, and Rupsis and Purington. So the motion fails. We'll continue with the discussion of the motion, the amended motion. Councilmember Owen, you said that you wanted to be heard.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had one additional amendment that I want to offer, and I will offer this, and then if you don't mind, Mayor, if there's a second for the amendment, I would like to hear from the city administrator. We had discussed during the budget committee review of the CIP that we have this sort of inconsistency about planning documents. So there are some cases where the plans or the studies that lead to a capital investment are included in the CIP. They are not themselves capital. But there are other cases where the plans or the studies necessary for the project are not included in the CIP. So my suggestion and the amendment I will offer tonight is to strike the planning documents because they themselves are not capital. But I will say, as I offer that amendment, and I'll wait for a second as well, that whether we strike them all or put them all in, I am agnostic to, but I think we need to address this inconsistency. So my motion would be to strike all planning documents from the capital improvement plan, not strike the funding, just the existence in the capital plan.
Is it possible, Councilmember Owen, to be more specific by page, line item, or anything else?
There are quite a few. So I think there are a couple of parks plans in here. The aquatics, the water study, the aquatics, pools, waiting facilities. There is the comprehensive plan is in here. There are a couple of engineering plans. There are a handful of plans throughout. And again, I don't object to the plans. They themselves are not capital. If the preference of council is to have plans in there, then let's just put them all in there. Let's just have consistency so we know what we're looking at.
I'll second for discussion.
Okay, so you've heard the motion. Discussion now on the proposed amendment. Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess staff, help us out on this one. We'll be here all night if we don't have some direction.
And Chris?
Yeah, Councilmember Owen, Mayor and Council, thanks for the conversation earlier today. I agree that we can improve on our consistency of having the plans, and then I would promote having the plans in here. Why? We don't have anything else that looks beyond 1 year. So if we don't put them in the CIP or come up with a different tool, and tonight I don't think we're going to come up with a different tool, if we don't put them in the CIP, the fear is they don't get recognized, and the truth is a lot of money is spent on plans to plan for future capital expenditures. So I promote the idea of us improving by making sure we have a consistency of plans in here, but that we do include them until we find a better mechanism to be looking out into the second, third, fourth, fifth year of planning processes. Thank you.
Okay, further discussion on the motion. Councilmember Gulick and Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I think I agree that semantically, like it's not a capital project. I think it's really useful to have the plans in there, just because when I look out and over the years, I like to see it coordinates things in a way that, like, if I have to look elsewhere for plans, like in a budget or something like that, then I'm going back and forth. Like, are they, is this all happening? So I think I'd prefer to go in a direction of having all the plans included, although I realize too that at a certain point, you get a little dinky $5,000 plan or something like that. Where do you draw the line? So, but I also agree with your point on consistency or semantically, but I think I will vote against, as stated, because of for coordination purposes. I find it very useful to have them in here.
Okay, Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I sort of see the irony of taking out plans from a planning document. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Treaky?
One of my suggestions in trying to do a better job of tracking this would be to identify the different levels of planning that go on, because there are a number of different levels of planning that are going on. And if different things have happened in the past that are not covered in the years that are listed on there, to simply put in a footnote, probably in the project, saying when the planning document was accepted.
Okay, any further discussion on the motion? Councilmember Joy? And Nice?
Let's see if we can try to solve this here. So to Councilmember Gulick's comments, it's my understanding that there is a dollar threshold for something to go into the capital improvement plan. It's possible that threshold may be too low. That's something we can save for another day. But I guess my question to the city administrator is, if your recommendation is that all plans that are directly connected to capital or go over a certain threshold, so we don't have every small study in there, do you need to hear from council tonight? Or is that something that you would just agree to do, that if council wants to see some documents in there, then we're going to get all the studies in there that are related to a capital investment? Or do you need us to vote on this tonight?
I guess, honestly, I'd like some time to work with Andy and the staff to define what plans are in and what are out, and be consistent about that.
So we talked in the budget committee about a number of other sort of structural thoughts on how we would do the capital improvement plan. Is this a conversation we can have this summer about how we structure it, what's in and out, whether or not the current dollar threshold makes sense? Can we just have an agreement to keep working on this?
Yes, yeah, I mean, I would anticipate, frankly, unless you want something, especially if you leave them in, that next year's proposed CIP and that process will include a more defined, clear point of what plans are in and what ones aren't, and why.
Mayor, I don't want to step over top of Councilmember Neese, who's seeking recognition, but with that commitment, I would be willing to withdraw my amendment pending whatever Councilmember Neese has to say.
And it's your second, so you're in control.
It was mine second for discussion, but I did have a question for clarification, because I agree with a lot of these issues were said, but my thought here on this is, when we look at the CIP, we typically, we're not seeing the plans. We're not really reviewing, analyzing these plans, and even agreeing to the plans. However, maybe Councilmember Owen is correct. We do need to remove all the plans and put them in a separate approval process. Do we even want to continue down the process of these plans and make sure all the plans are in another document that we review and say, yeah, keep going forward, and maybe even see that before the CIP, because that may actually indicate what should be included in the CIP or not. And so if what you're saying is, if something like that can happen where it's consistent like that, I'm willing to withdraw my second, but I believe that we do need to do something with the plans to be consistent, and I prefer to have them withdrawn and actually review them from time to time on their own, so we understand really what plans are there and what we're going to be expecting to see in the CIP and then later on in the budget.
Okay, what I'm hearing is a commitment by staff to work on this issue and a consent to withdraw that proposed amendment. So I see some nodding heads, so that's the deal. We now go back to the underlying motion that's been amended 3 times. Is there any further discussion on the amended motion? Councilmember Neese, and then Council, let's try to move to a vote.
Yeah, I just want to check with Andy. Did we cover every of the areas that you had kind of brought to us?
Yeah, I think with the removal of the transportation and parks, we can solve those at a future date.
All right,
so thank you.
Okay, Council, are we ready to vote? Okay, if in favor of the amendment, or I'm sorry, the motion with those 3 amendments, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. And motion passes unanimously. Thank you for your discussion and your patience. It is 7:48. We'll try to come back as close to 7:55 as possible. 1,500 silver.
It's running. I know.
Oh, it's going to be warm.
It's going to be warm. I think about the same thing.
Wimp! Either that or the gas tank will be empty and it'll be freezing. Okay, welcome back. We're on item number 3. Denise, would you read item number 3?
New City Hall funding options. Staff and Budget and Finance Council Committee recommends approval.
Okay, thank you. Another big topic. Notice our terminology here. This is no longer the building formerly that started with an S. It is the new City Hall. And so, yes. Yeah, so we've got a lot of details to work through here, a lot of cushions to turn over to look for very large nickels and dimes. I'll just remind the council, though, that eventually staff's going to have to define a central question to resolve. They need us to resolve some question. And so I'm going to ask staff, as you make your presentation at the end of this, tell us exactly what you want us to decide. That's the big question. So, Andy, you and Jessica are our presenters, I assume? So it's all yours.
Thank you, Mayor. So I will end with, I hope, a very clear question for you guys. First I'll start out by thanking the staff as well as Budget and Finance Committee. We spent 2 hours and 20 minutes together, really digging in deep. And I think we've come out with a very solid recommendation. There were a few items that the committee had asked for further explanation on, and that's really the bulk of what we're going to spend the presentation on this evening. But we'll start off with, it wasn't that long ago. I don't remember the date. It was in November 28th. You were presented with some options and the full cost of $43 million to do the full build out. And that was the general direction of council, was proceed with that. That's what we want to see, and come back with some funding so we can accomplish this. So that's what we set out to do. We had an original funding proposal of $29.6 million that came from the general fund, ARPA, and a small portion from the building fund. Well, that total project estimate has risen to $43.2 million. So we were tasked with identifying $13.6 million of available funding to proceed with the full build out. So we met on December 8th, and we had identified funding sources, one-time kind of reallocation of resources that total about $12.8 to $16.3 million. There was a description of these in your staff memo, but the reason for the range is largely to the unknown of the sale of existing assets. We don't know when they'll sell and how much they will sell for. And then historic tax credits, there's some question about what may be available there. So those combined, along with the one-time reallocation resources, kind of come up with that $13 to $16 million range. What I will say here is that while I think we've accomplished the task of identifying the $13.6 million, what we will likely need, given the timeline at which these funds will become available, there will likely be a need for some short-term financing in order to cash flow the construction, likely until the sale of this building being the major player in that whole funding capital stack. Originally, when we had the $29.6 million budget, we didn't want to count on the sale of this building because I was skeptical that it would, I thought it would take 50 years for us to dispose of this, and so we didn't want to rely upon that. But turns out I was wrong, and there's a little more interest in this than I had anticipated. So it's probably more reasonable to rely upon that. The two items that remain outstanding and that the committee had desired further explanation from staff on was the exploration of energy savings performance contracts, and Jessica's going to speak to those, as well as identifying some potential additional funding in parks funds, specifically Park District 1 and the Parks Program Reserves or Parks Program Fund. And I'll go through those. So I'm going to turn it to Jessica for the next few slides on energy performance.
All right. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you, Andy. So I'm not an expert in energy performance contracting, but I have talked to a few people that are. So this is a graphic from the Montana DEQ, and I did speak to their program director there. That's who administers the contract projects for the state. So essentially, energy performance contracting is where we identify a project that we want to do that's going to increase your energy efficiency. And the idea is that the operating costs that you save from going with more efficient systems is going to then pay for your financing. So it is still a financing mechanism, and it's really useful for projects that don't have capital funds up front. And the idea is, as this graphic shows, here's your operating budget. You'd hire this consultant to come in. They're going to look at what improvements they can make to your building so that your new operating costs are much lower. They're going to take that delta and say, this is the money that you now are going to pay us to finance these improvements over the next 15, 20, 30 years. And then at the end of it, you have your cost savings with your new lower operating costs. So the reason why this was not identified initially as a good option for the new City Hall project was just that we weren't anticipating financing. We were anticipating having that capital investment up front. And then having spoken with our our engineers, they just felt it wasn't a good fit. By the time that we realized that we may need some financing options, we were a little far along in the process to then go and contract with an EPC contractor. So we did look at some pros and cons of the energy performance contracting. So it is a financing option. You are paying back the cost over time versus the capital investment. There is less initial risk because you are partnering with this consultant who's taking on that risk of actually purchasing and installing the equipment. And then it's just an additional opportunity that then you don't have the budget limitations that you would have by doing the capital investment yourself. The cons is that over time, you do have a higher financing cost than if you just purchase or pay for the investment up front. There's a lack of owner control. Usually the contract says that they have to use their consultants to do all of the repair and maintenance on the equipment. The length of obligation can be greater than the length of life even for some of the components. And so that's the next point about technology and advancements. Sometimes the new equipment is actually going to be obsolete by the time that you would pay off the obligation. And then also your consultant is deciding what is in scope or out of scope, which can lead to some unnecessary scope items or sort of a difference of scope and priorities. And then again, their outside costs, they're making a profit off of this project. And then at this point, it would cause project delays just because we are so far along in our project to date. So I think I'll hand it back over to Andy.
Okay. So the two funds that I was asked to review with the help of the Parks Department was Park District 1 and Parks Program Funds. Park District 1, I think you guys are all very familiar with. And generally what we did is we went and said, okay, what's the current available funds and what's the next 12 months really look like with what we've already committed to, what have we already signed contracts to, and what are we anticipating bringing forward or bidding out here in the near term. And very simply, at $3.2 million today, we're anticipating about $4.1 million through the FY23 assessments, which I guess since we've done this, actually got the first half, but still $4.1 million. And there's some grants coming in from the community development block grants that were approved, as well as some LWCF funds that would bolster to get to about $4.1 million. Contingent on bid pricing, we're estimating about $5.8 million in commitments and cash outlay over the next 12 months, leaving about $1.5 million available. I did note here, as we talked about in the last presentation, there's a recommendation to use the majority of that for the Pioneer Park tennis courts.
Yeah, I'm sorry, so that 1.5 would pay for the Pioneer Park, gotcha.
Yeah, yep, this does not envision the Pioneer Park at this point. 'Cause
Okay.
no decision's been
Thank
made
you.
on that. And I'll back up. The tie between the Stillwater building, or the new City Hall, Billings Government Center, and parks may not be clear to everybody. So the way this would work is we would not use park funds for construction of the building. We would use park funds for eligible park expenses, some of which are still remain in the general fund for a one-time use that would free up general fund dollars. This would not require an increase in the PD1 assessment. So park program funds is a budgeted fund, which is actually an accumulation of about 6 accounting funds that we use for a variety of, we kind of roll up a few different funds internally to budget and financial report as parks program funds. These 6 funds are largely cash in lieu, but not exclusively. They are park acquisition, parkland sales, the Kiwanis donations, Cottonwood Park, Trash for Trees, and Batting Cage Replacement Fund. So Park Acquisition Fund is the largest of them all. What I did here is I went back 12 years, which is when we switched accounting systems, 12 years ago. And so the detail's pretty good up to there, and beyond that it's kind of vague. So we could find, we have $1.6 million. Well, what's it from? $900,000 is cash in lieu. There's $270,000 from cell tower leases that we've accumulated over time. Part of that funding package to get to the 13 million is taking $225,000 of that. So that is in the recommendation. $111,000 from Par 3. We get a sometimes annual contribution from them, depending on their net operating proceeds. And there's about $144,000 of interest income, which really should be allocated to the funding sources. Most of it would go to cash in lieu, but it is in there. Parkland sales, we had a sale of something back in 09 and 08 that generated $104,000. Like I said, when we changed accounting systems in 2012, it's really difficult to go figure out what that was for. So I'm not certain the source of those funds. And then in 2013, the wastewater plant bought a portion of Bitterroot Heights Park for, I believe, something for the wastewater facility. And so there was $75,000 put in there as well. And there's some interest earnings to get to the 219. We're not aware of a legal restriction on those, but staff does recommend that they, be maintained for parks, park amenities. The Kiwanis donations, these come from license plate sales. We get a portion of people who get the Kiwanis license plate, and it's to be used for Parks and Rec purposes. Cottonwood Park, these are cash in lieu exclusively for Cottonwood. There's a total of, almost $500,000 of cash in lieu for Parks and Rec. Some of it is in the Park Acquisition Fund, but there is $322,500 in this specific Cottonwood Fund. But we do have an additional $196 tracked in the Park Acquisition Fund. Trash for Trees, there's $90,000 in there. This is from aluminum can recycling, and then there's some donors that contribute directly to that, not significant, but there's about $90,000 in there for the Trash for Trees program. And then the Batting Cage Replacement Fund, there's $342 in there. And this was a council initiative created, I believe, before any of you were on council, or maybe right as you started perhaps, that sets aside some funding if there's net profit on an annual basis from the batting cage for future batting cage replacement. We have accumulated funds. We did spend some recently to replace netting, so that's why it's so low. But it's not a real net positive venture, so it doesn't really generate much revenue. So with that, this is kind of where we're getting the specific question for council. I wanted to, I guess, offer up to the budget committee any other opportunities to kind of expand upon what I've got here. There's not technically specific action. You're not voting on something. here directly tonight. There's no resolution or ordinance here, but we are looking for very clear direction on, yeah, we want you to proceed with the full build out, and we'll be developing the 24 budget with, these funding recommendations in mind, some of these reallocating resources, and then identifying, I guess, whatever's needed in the FY24 budget and future budgets to come. So I guess I'd turn it to the Budget Committee at this point, and then Mayor, as you'd like.
You bet. I'm going to turn it to members of the Budget Committee, and just a reminder of the last bullet there, what we need to do tonight is to give staff some direction about these funding alternatives, add to them, subtract from them, discuss them generally. So Councilmember Owen, you're head of the Budget Committee, so I'll look to you first, and then you can pass to any other members.
I will
No?
defer to the Deputy Mayor.
Okay. Councilmember Boyette and Councilmember Gulick.
Thank you, Mayor. Andy, I thought one of the things you had brought up was the city's going to get some opiate money from lawsuits way in the back east, and we're going to get maybe up to $100,000 this year. Could we not use that as another funding source?
Yeah, so the funding package that generated 13.6, I can't remember it now. Yeah, 12.8 to 16.3, neither of the numbers I said, includes some grant funding, and there's two, I'll say, grants that we're getting that we know of. One of them is an energy efficiency grant, so it'll be about $160,000 that can go towards energy efficient improvements, of which there'll be plenty in this building to exceed $160,000. And then we are going to be a recipient of some funds from the opioid settlements. It will be approximately $35,000 per year, I believe, for 18 years. We'll be getting the 2-year installment, I believe, within the next 6 to 12 months, so about $70,000, and then we should be getting about $35,000 a year every year thereafter. Our recommendation was to take the $70,000 payment we'll be getting, as well as the first annual payment we'll get, so about $100,000 to put towards this.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Gulick.
I know, I guess we all probably read the packet, and it does have it in there, the reductions in scope. But for the public to know and everything, that it wasn't that we just took what the price tag and didn't look at the city hall and look for opportunities for some reductions. And staff worked with the design team and contractor and to identify those. And so just want to make that clear for everyone listening as well, that that is also part of the getting to our goal.
Councilmember Owen?
So now I will sort of provide some of those comments as suggested. First of all, again, as I said earlier, huge thanks to the staff. They really did come with a massive spreadsheet of lots of ideas, including ideas they didn't recommend. So I think they did a good job of giving us everything. And if we have to keep addressing the budget issues surrounding the city hall, then I think we're going to have some options that have been left on the table to address that. I would encourage council members to make sure they've looked at this list, because I think this list is important. I do think that we are going to have to come back and consider this issue of parking for staff. I don't recommend we do it tonight, but it's a significant concern that I think needs to be understood and addressed at some point. I do want to talk about these two items just real briefly to give some context as to why we asked for further discussion. So on the energy savings performance contract, and I think maybe that analysis was a little negative as to the potential, but there was a suggestion in the reduction of project scope that we leave out some chillers, or that we don't replace them, or there's about a $400,000, if I remember, issue with some chillers. And you just heard the finance director say there's going to be lots of energy efficiency improvements in the building. So I think that as a potential strategy to close the gap, funding those energy efficiency improvements and those chillers through a performance contract where the energy savings is what pays for it makes some sense. The block grant that we will get from the federal government is specifically designed to help municipalities look at these types of activities. It is not true that a performance contract would last longer than the life cycle of a project, although it might last longer than technology improvements. In order to be in a performance contract, the only capital investments, they would have to be life cycle cost effective. That's a requirement of it. But I think my concern at least was that the chillers would somehow be left out and that would put us in a vulnerable position. So we had tossed this up. On the park side, I believe it was $450,000 that we thought was the park's office space build out cost. So the idea was not to take money out of PD1, and I think Andy said this, to do general Stillwater build out, but the parks itself, and just to give council a number, that's about $450,000 is I think the amount to build out that space. So otherwise, there's been a lot of work here on the staff part. I'm very confident in these recommendations, and I appreciate everybody's work on it.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Chiriqui, Neese, and Shaw.
Okay, so first I want to make just a general comment that I personally have never ever said that I would take the general obligation bond off the table for the build out for the Stillwater building. You know, I know there's been a lot of talk about it and stuff like that, but I don't believe, I would want to see a actual vote on that by council before we actually totally took that off the table. A couple of questions. Why are we not using all of the drug forfeiture dollars?
So, Councilmember Chiriqui, we did recommend, there's about $900,000 in that fund. We did recommend about $500,000 of that being put towards the Stillwater project. There are some other needs that the police department is foreseeing in the future, and I just had a meeting with them last Thursday, and that could potentially be a funding source, you know, for some of these other technology needs that they have.
Okay, thank you. Another direction. I am not I have sat in this courtroom when it was a courtroom a number of times, and I'm not very optimistic that we're going to make much money off of the people that have done that. So I think that the $500,000 is a very, very optimistic number. Is there a staff person all the way in the back that might want to comment on that?
There's an elected official sitting on the back.
Oh, yes, an elected official.
Judge Kolar, if you would like to, you're more than welcome to.
And just for council members to understand, the estimated amount outstanding is about 4.5 million, I think. So we shared that concern and tried to bring the amount down dramatically.
Right, and you're talking about in collections, council member and mayor. The collections, there's quite a bit in collections. We've changed collection agencies to be a little bit more aggressive on individuals that have already been fined. I mean, these go back years, and we weren't very aggressive with the collection agency that we had before, and now we've changed. There's some ideas. Understand, yes, absolutely agree with you. I'm optimistic. I am. I think we can do it.
Okay, thank you. Have we explored the possibility of putting a cell tower or an antenna farm or something like that on top of the building?
So, Councilmember Chiriqui, no, we haven't been approached. We haven't went out and kind of forwarded that idea. I don't know if there's a need. Certainly, if 5G technology, then, you know, there could be some because those are spaced us significantly closer. But no, we haven't explored that.
Okay. Well, when I was at the League of Cities and the thing in Kansas City, the League of Cities in Kansas City thing, I was approached both by T-Mobile and I forget the other one, not Verizon, talking about, you know, the need for cell towers in Montana and here. And I'm happy to reach out to both of those representatives if you think that that would be worthwhile.
Well, I won't turn down any ideas that could bring in some potential revenue. So, yeah, certainly, yeah, we could discuss that and see if it's a potential or not. And, yeah, I don't know what the coverage net looks like in the downtown area, if there's a need there or not.
Okay, thank you. That's my list.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that next up was Council Member Neese, and after Council Member Neese, Council Member Shaw.
Thank you, Mayor. Andy, would you mind putting up the slide where you had some more information about all the funds you looked at in parks, I think it was?
Yeah,
that one.
Okay.
Okay, so By the way, thank you for all the staff and budget committee. This helps a lot. So I really appreciate you doing a lot of the hard work before getting here. So Andy, the parkland, you said that was sold in 2008 or 9, so over 10 years, that money's just been sitting there and Parks has done nothing with it? Or do we know what the plan was for that at all?
I don't know what the plan is. It's been getting some interest income though, so.
Okay, it's earning interest, okay.
Yeah.
Well, at least it's not buried in the ground. Can we allocate that to the build out of the Parks Department of the City Hall Governance Center?
I would say I'd want to explore in more detail what the source of those 104,000 are. We don't have a lot in our accounting system. Like I said, we could see what we can find. If there's limitations there, I'm just not aware of them at this time.
Okay, so if there's no limitations there, we should be able to use that for some of the build out of the parks. Okay, I don't know if we need to make a motion to recommend that as adding to the list, but I would make that motion if we need to if there's no limitations to use that 219,344 for the build out of the Parks Department of the Governance Center.
So that's a motion?
That's the motion.
Okay. Is there a second? Councilmember Boyette? Okay. Well, let's see. So where are we at here?
I guess we don't have a motion to begin with. Okay. I'll withdraw the motion and we can add it later.
Okay. All right. Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you. Again, I want to echo thank you to staff, thank you to the budget committee. In general, I think this is a really good package for having to come up with a large amount of money that none of us were anticipating. I think this is very comprehensive. My one kind of question, and I'd emailed this to council, so I'm not even sure who can answer this the best, but as we've had conversations about utilizing the marijuana tax money for substance abuse, mental health, prevention, something in that category, kind of to go with our public safety funding. And again, I know it's unrestricted money, it can be used for anything. But I think we have pretty clear ties that already fit within that scope in the city. Drug court is one that came to mind. I don't have a long list of the rest of them, but I'm curious if the committee had a conversation about that or kind of directing that. Not that I think we need a motion for it, but I would like to be able to explain that to people, why we consider this as part of the same umbrella.
Okay, Councilor Gulick, you want to address that question?
I'll start. Yes, we certainly want to have there be some sort of nexus. But this is a law and justice center. So the courts as well as the police department fit out was our thinking. That was.
So kind of directing it, allocating it to that.
That's right. And again, you'll note that it's not all of it. Half of it is what we're projecting each year for over 5 years. So.
Okay. I'm going to turn to Councilmember Owen because I recognized before, if that's okay. Councilmember Owen.
So I am going to go ahead, I'll get this motion on the floor to get things rolling. But before I do that, I just want Andy to clarify, it might help council members think through. I don't believe that these changes are all going to go into effect tomorrow. These are budget changes that will be made as they need revenue. So these projects have not been bid yet. There are still ARPA dollars that are there. So these are things that staff will come to as bills come in and they need to address the deficits. Which is important to Councilmember Neese's suggested amendment, because the motion will include the committee's recommendation that we keep looking at parks reserves, and this would be a part of it. And so I think it would be clear that that would be in the scope of the motion that I'm about to make. I move to approve the funding option for the new City Hall as recommended by staff and the Budget and Finance Council Committee.
Second.
Okay. Councilmember Neese with the second. Motion is to approve the Budget Committee's recommendations. Discussion now on the motion. Councilmember Joy, did you?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I had a question about, and I think maybe Assistant City Administrator Eflin can clarify for me. If you're talking about build out for the Parks Department. Maybe I have a misunderstanding here, or haven't remembered all my facts. How does that impact the building that we own that currently holds the Parks Department? Thank you.
So Mayor and Councilmember Joy, what we've looked at is moving basically Parks admin and support over to the Stillwater building. We did not plan for space for the rec specialists because they do a lot of programming out of that space over at the senior center. So that's kind of how we've left it. And then a lot of the equipment storage and things like that would remain at the senior center.
Thank you. Thank you. That is actually how I remembered it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, very good. Thank you. Councilmember Purington.
I'm sorry. So a couple of questions. One has to do with the energy performance contract. I kind of hear different things coming from Councilmember Owen and what Jessica had to say. So I guess I don't really understand how that's going to play into this. What sort of costs are you talking about? I don't get where that's something that we're willing to vote on that right now, or do we have enough information? The second question is with regard to the marijuana funding. Are we lowballing that marijuana money that would be coming in? And could we possibly, year to year or quarter to quarter, maybe even add on to what that would, that we could put into the City Hall? So those are my two questions. Thank you.
Okay, Jessica, if you want to address the energy performance contracts, I think part of that is how much might be gained there. If it's $10,000, it's not going to be worth it. If it's $10 million, let's pursue it. So, but address that if you would.
Sure, thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Purington, regarding the energy performance contract. So like I said, it really is a financing option. So that's not like grant money, or it's not money that we're getting for free, so to speak. It's a way to finance energy improvement projects by anticipating what your savings are going to be from your utility costs once you install this more energy efficient equipment, and then you're utilizing that then to pay off your debt. So it really, and this was the conversation I had with the program director here, is that it's more often used in existing buildings. So say we're in City Hall and our boilers end of life, our lights need to be replaced. So we don't have money to pay for that up front. So we would contract with somebody to say, okay, well, if we replace all this equipment with brand new equipment that's going to be this much more efficient, then your operating costs, say your operating costs are $500,000 a year. They're saying, we're going to drop your operating cost to $400,000 a year, and then the other $100,000 a year is going to go toward paying down your debt over however many years to then pay off that equipment, if that makes sense. So right now, we're not recommending that just because we're pretty far along in the process to now get under contract with someone. Additionally, if I believe the conversation was we have other funding options if we would need to borrow money. There's other financing options we would look at.
Okay, can somebody address the marijuana allocation?
So to the second question, Councilmember Purington, I mean, our speculation is we're not lowballing it, but certainly we're being conservative deliberately in this recommendation. We're not proposing to use all of what's anticipated. It's roughly half of what's anticipated. So love to be, well, no, I wouldn't. I would not love to be pleasantly surprised that we bring in a whole lot more money. But if we do, that'll be a different issue than what we have here. We're very comfortable saying we'll get in the 2 and likely get in double that annually.
So follow up, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
So Chris, if we find that we are getting more from the marijuana sales, would we adjust that automatically, or would that come back to council and would say, hey, we got this instead of that, we can use more towards the Stillwater in the courts and, you know, the police department, you know, can we add more money to that fund, if you will?
So Council.
Is that the option?
Councilmember Purinton, up to you guys. We did not propose it that way. We proposed it with the committee of 2 for the 5 years. And frankly, I would suggest sticking to that. I think we can answer that question if and when we cross the bridge that there are more dollars. I think one of the things we don't know is exactly what the cost and impacts are of legalization of marijuana. So we don't want to put all the dollars into this. Though also, as was stated in the answer to Councilmember Shaw's question, I want to be very clear with our taxpayers and with our legislators that the money is going for our Law and Justice Center components directly related to trying to deal with the impacts of legalization.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Boyette and Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. We had a good time at our budget meeting. We really did. We went through I think we went through almost every scenario we could find out, and we came up with these topics. One thing we missed, though, the county sells their Metro. They put a name on there, and they charge $100,000 a year for that. Have we even thought of that? If so, I'll put my name and I'll give you some money to put my name on the building. Yeah. Have we thought of that?
We did not discuss naming rights of City Hall. We certainly have when it came to the rec center, but we have not had a conversation about naming rights at City Hall.
How about the men's room? Councilmember Boyette?
I mean, they get $100,000 a year for the Metro.
I had the same thought.
Why not?
Yeah.
I mean,
or parts of it, not necessarily the whole building,
yeah.
but the lobby,
right. Restaurant.
the restaurant, things that.
We wanted to look at every option, and we didn't discard anything either. So sometimes we threw them out and said we didn't like that, but at least we brought up the ideas.
I guess what I would suggest to staff that they give that some consideration, maybe talk about with, are there parts of the building that would be appropriate? Not every part of the building, I think, would be appropriate for naming rights, right? But maybe there are parts, yeah. Councilmember Neese.
Well, Councilmember Boyette, if you donate the entire amount to do the City Hall, we'll call it the Boyette City Hall, or the Boyette Council Chambers. How that? All right.
Deputy Mayor.
Deputy Mayor. There we go. Actually, at this time, I think I know that I'm going to make my amendment. I know that although this may be covered by part of this, what says here is as far as any kind of possibility of parks funding, sometimes the devil's in the details, and I'd like to make sure that's specified that this money that was found here in parkland sales that has been sitting there for such a long time that we actually utilize that for the development of the Parks Department. It's going to be like property to property. It's just going to be a building instead of land. It's the Parks Department. And so I'd make that motion to move that to 344 to make it available for the development of the Parks Department in the new governance center, if it's no strings attached to it.
Oh, I'll second, sorry.
Okay, so there's that clarification. And that's a proposed amendment. We do have an underlying motion before us. Any discussion on the proposed amendment before we proceed to a vote on it? Okay, is the motion clear? If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. Nay. Motion passes. Councilmember Rupes voting in opposition. Staff can look into that one, I guess, a little bit more. And I've got a question or two questions for staff, or just clarification about the cuts that have been made from the project itself. My understanding is $1.9 million approximately in original value engineering. And then this committee, though, came up with, the budget committee, another, call it 800,000. So 1.9 plus 8 is $2.7 million of true project reductions or cuts. Is that the correct math?
So,
and I'm just going by what's in the
yeah,
staff memo.
I think you're fairly accurate. 1.7, 1.9 million was done beforehand to arrive at the total of 43.2 million. And then there were some, I'm going to turn to Kevin on this one, some additional reductions that are being recommended, which are, 797, I think.
So we'll see if Andy can do some math in his head. But yeah, value engineering, we were at $1.906 million. And then we did remove bits and pieces of those packages that we'd called out at our last one. I'm trying to go through them here, but the new elevator doors and interiors and security overlay for the elevator and the chiller replacement and labor miscellaneous equipment, I think those were the main things that we kind of took out of there. And you want me to? What's that?
What was the total in the staff? Was it 747 or 797? I don't know.
797, I rounded up to 800.
Okay. Yep.
And then 1.9 million in value engineering reductions. I'm just reading verbatim from the staff report. 1.9 plus 0.8 is 2.7 of project reductions.
That's what my calculator says too. So.
Okay. I feel better. Okay, and then the last thing, there was $500,000 of vacancy savings.
So,
And can you address that? My particular
Yeah.
concern is that departments have been motivated or not, they've not had a disincentive to have vacancy savings because they'll be able to use it next year. It's not being, quote, held against them. But if it's a use it or lose it situation, are we going to see departments want to make sure that they don't have vacancy savings and that $500,000 then becomes too optimistic?
Yeah, so thanks, Mayor. We are not directing anybody to hold positions vacant in order to create funds for this. We do not want to do that. That amount is just purely based off of our historical vacancy savings in the general fund and public safety fund. I'm very confident at $500,000 that will be available. In years past, when there's identified vacancy savings, we've looked to that for some kind of one-time expenses or reallocating for other projects in future years. And that's really what we're recommending here, is that it's very likely that those funds will be available, and we're recommending that they be allocated to this project and as opposed to anything else.
Okay, hopefully that history will hold true. Further discussion now on the amended motion before we proceed to a vote. Councilmember Joy?
No, I have a general comment, so wait.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to limit it to questions. So any comments on the motion before us?
Okay. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I want to say, yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the hard work of staff. Thank you for the Budget Committee for the work that they've done to put these forward. I'm glad to see that there is a kind of comprehensive thought process that goes into where those monies would come from. I'd also like to say, there was kind of sort of, why would you buy a building without having the money to build it out? Opportunity knocks and you jump. And I would also like to say that, if it hadn't been for votes from one of our congressional members, ARPA money would have never come to Billings to begin with. So thank you, Senator Tester. That's really, really important. We didn't, as we started this project, we did not know where we would be, and here we are. So I appreciate the hard work of the committee to come up with these and the staff. Someone asked, well, if you don't like something, why should you vote for it? And that's what municipal government does. It works. It works for the people. There may be things in everything that I don't like, but I wouldn't stand in the way of us being able to govern and to do the work of the voters and the people who live in this city that want us to get things done. That's the difference between a municipal government and what happens at different levels of state government and federal government. So thank you.
Very good, thank you. Further comments on the motion for proceed to vote. Councilor Ripsis.
Yes, thank you. Council, just for a quick comment. We just had a long discussion under the CIP about needing to prioritize maintenance and those types of things in our transportation network. And we notice here in our entitlement share section where we might have a direct operational impact on our ability to maintain our roads. I'm disappointed in that. It seems like we're telling the staff two different things if we go in this direction. Hopefully we won't need it, but or we can find some other way to do it. I'm not in favor of reducing support for maintenance and landscaping on our roads. Those things are important, arguably more important than a city hall, which I don't think there are more than a handful of people outside of this room that really care about that, but I might be wrong on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Rupsis. I'll just comment on the obvious, which is we're looking at several years of serious belt tightening at every level in our budget and to make these numbers a reality. So no secret there. Okay, anything else before we proceed to a vote? All right, we'll move on. Then the motion is for approval of the funding scenarios suggested with the Budget Committee with the amendment concerning the park sale dollars included in that. If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Chris?
I'd ask the council, I didn't hear in that motion, I mean, implied the reason you did all that is so that we would move forward with full project implementation. But I think it would be very helpful, candidly, to have on the record that motion for Kevin, for the team, and for the contractor, Dick Anderson. So that would be my request, is if the council is inclined to put a motion on the table, being clear about moving forward with the full project. Thank you.
Point well taken. Is there somebody who'd like to make that motion? Councilmember Rowan, you had the underlying, or the first motion. Go ahead.
Sure. I would make a motion that that the city council, staff, everyone involved move forward with the full scope of the city hall build out with the funding recommendations adopted tonight.
Councilmember Boyette would like to second that. Any discussion? Councilmember Rupsis.
I'm just going to say that I'm not going to vote. I'm not going to vote for this. If we had done them probably in the correct order of voting for this one first and then voting to fund them, I would have voted the same way. But I'm not going to vote for this, but I still would have supported funding it assuming that this would have passed anyway, if it had been in the right order.
Okay. Any further discussion? If Councilmember Rowan?
Did that motion get you what you needed? I mean, I think Councilmember Rupsis is right. The scope should have been addressed before the funding. Nonetheless, if staff feels more comfortable with belts and suspenders, I'm happy to do that.
Yes, and I think that was assumed in the original, but let's not rely on assumptions. Are we ready to vote, Council? Okay, so if the motion is clear, all in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. Motion passes. Councilmember Rupsis voting in opposition. All other council members voting in favor. I think that then concludes item number 3. And we'll go to public comment on non-agenda items. Any public comment on anything not on our agenda this evening? Seeing none?
Mayor, I just got a hand up.
Okay, thank you. So Kevin, if you can identify our caller for public comment on anything not on our agenda, we just ask the caller, who I believe is Kathy Smith, to identify yourself, tell us your address, and keep your comments to 3 minutes. Kathy, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can, so go ahead.
Very good. I'm Kathy Smith, 2440 River Oaks Drive here in Billings. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for listening to me. I represent Off the Streets Corporation, which is a 501c3 nonprofit corporation with a goal to purchase and renovate a building in downtown Billings, which will house a low barrier shelter and very low income housing. We applaud the COC and the Montana Rescue Mission for their efforts to provide the low barrier shelter that they're doing this winter. It's very important, and especially this week when we look at this weather, we could not have gone through the winter without their help. So my purpose tonight is to encourage the council, mayor, and the staff to keep in mind the need for a permanent low barrier shelter going forward. Both of these options are not permanent. They may turn out to be, but at this point, we don't know that they are permanent. So Off the Streets continues to work on raising funds to buy and renovate a building for a permanent low barrier shelter. That's our goal. So we ask for your support by talking to your constituents about the need, this critical need of ours. And we at Off the Streets are available to visit with the council individually or to present our plan at any time. And certainly naming rights might include Boyette Homeless Shelter located in downtown Billings, should that be in the cards. So thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we got competition going now. So, all right, well, thank you very much. Any other public comment on non-agenda items? Don't see any. Are there any council initiatives? Councilmember Shaw?
I'm hoping this is very simple, and I didn't put any of this into writing, but with our reconsideration vote and question, one of the options presented that is not currently a part of our city code is giving council the option to send something back to the zoning commission. I think that's a great idea, but it does require a legal ordinance change. So I would make a motion to direct staff to bring that back to us so that we can get that process going in the new year.
And the only
Hopefully
comment I
simple,
would
but-
say is, what we usually do is try to ask people to give some notice and then come back with something to put actually.
I'm
put
happy
on
to
the
do
agenda.
that too. I just didn't want this to get lost. So I'll put it, usually I put stuff in writing, but I just wanted to bring this up so that it didn't get forgotten at the end of the year. But I'm happy to bring this back in January, write it up.
And the only thing I would say is it won't be necessary if staff says it's on their plan and that they will just do it.
Right.
But one way or another, it kind of goes back to staff to tell us what you would like us to do.
So Director Friday and I had his monthly happen to fall today, and we talked about exactly that as well as several other items that are coming, kind of as recode updates and some tweaks and changes. So that's one that's been in discussion between planning, legal, and admin to bring to you.
Perfect. I won't do anything then.
And on the Zimmerman project, we got an email at the end of last week saying their intent was to withdraw that, which would trigger a 4-month waiting period. And that's where that one's at, is my understanding. So, and I see some heads nodding. Councilmember Boyette and Councilmember Joy?
I noticed on the one slide that they call it the new city hall. Have we, the city, decided on anything yet? If so, what is it, and what do we have to do to get the process going to change the name so people don't continue to call it the Stillwater Building, because we won't call it that in the future?
Chris?
Mayor and council, no, I wouldn't say officially anything, and it just hasn't risen to the priority. We agree. We'd like to come up with something different, but I don't know what kind of process you want to do for that. Part of me also thinks that the issue of the Law and Justice Center is an important one for the community to be reminded of. You would have a much better feel than me as to how your constituents feel, whether people recognize in Billings that the City Hall is where the Law and Justice Center is, and that's where a lot of these dollars are going for public safety. But I do candidly get a little bit nervous that if that's nowhere in the kind of title and description, people might lose sight that we're not building admin offices, you know, for administration. Most of this building is courts and police and other functions. So
My proposal is the Billings Government and Justice Center. Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. And I have just a couple of thoughts based on Councilmember Shaw's maybe initiative, exactly how that works. That's actually given another option, approval, disapproval, going back to the zoning commission is something different than we've had. And I'm thinking of some very unpopular zone changes that we've had. And I'm thinking that even without a valid protest, there's neighbors can get very they have a lot of emotion that goes into whether or not their neighborhood is going to change. And there's a value to infill. And infill is where this issue very often comes up. Absolutely no comments when we build greenfields way out on the west end. There's no houses. There's nobody living there. So anything that you're doing doesn't, there's not the same impact as infill. So I would like to, as this goes forward, I would really like to see the consideration of how we put some sideboards on what can go back to the zoning commission as really important. Because if part of what we're talking about is maintenance, the expense of maintenance, and we're talking about how the city grows, how we recover our costs, whether or not we're maintaining the things we have, zone changes and planning and whether or not we have infill has tremendous impact on those things. So that's just my idea. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other items on council initiatives before we adjourn? Okay, thank you. Councilmember Purington?
Yeah, just a quick question for Chris, since you brought it up. On the RICO changes, will we see that in a workshop before it comes to council at a regular meeting?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, I don't recall the specificity there. We've got some, we would like to get moving along. I don't think they're big policy shockers or changers. So my suggestion would be, if there are big policy changes or differences, absolutely, they need a work session. And so whether there's 2 buckets or 1 bucket, won't try to push on fundamental changes but if we've seen a problem, that may add another 30 days to the process too. So I'd ask you to be open to seeing them either way, provided they're pretty straightforward on your policy directions in the past, consistent.
Okay, Councilmember Rowan?
A quick question on an existing initiative. Chris, when were we going to see the next conversation with Dan Clark and the charter review issues? Wasn't that supposed to be this winterish?
Well, we saw him, was not able to get fit into before the end of the year. I mean, we certainly can bring it, we can be looking at the first of the year as to a workshop to fit it in.
Okay, we don't have anything scheduled.
Correct, and actually, I don't know that you need Dan Clark to come here. I mean, he gave you the history, he gave you the legal, he provided that piece. If you go back and look at your initiative that was passed, I would encourage you to look closely at what that initiative asked to do, and ultimately, that would be a great work session discussion. How do you want to move forward with that?
Okay, council, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and Happy New Year. We are adjourned. And see you next year.
See you next year.